Call the meeting to order. Pursuant to the order of reference received from the House of Commons on Wednesday, November 2nd, 2016, the committee will begin its study on M39, Immigration to Atlantic Canada. And from the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, we have with us today Ms. Corinne Prince, the Director General, Integration Foreign Credentials Referral Office, Ms. Lori Hunter, Director, Economic Immigration Policy and Programs, and Mr. Umit Kiziltan, Director General, Research and Valuation. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
And sorry, do I have to hit the microphone?
Sorry? Yes, Ms. Hunter, please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to speak to the committee today. And as noted, my name is Lori Hunter, and I'm the Director, Economic Policy and Programs Division at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And with me today are Corinne Prince and Umit Kiziltan. Atlantic Canada faces a number of demographic challenges shaped by declining fertility rates and a long-standing trend of young residents leaving the region to settle and work elsewhere. Recently released census data indicates that the population of Atlantic Canada is declining in the 15 to 64 age range and increasing in the number of senior citizens. Atlantic Canadian provinces also face a number of challenges in attracting and retaining immigrants who could help to mitigate these demographic challenges. In 2014, 6.7% of the Canadian population lived in Atlantic Canada, but the region only welcomed 3.1% of new immigrants. Compte tenu des réalités démographiques et statistiques dans la région,
given the realities in the region, the study carried out by your committee on this region is very timely. Our department is aware that immigration is important in Atlantic Canada to support economic growth. There is a desire to see more immigrants settle and stay there. That is why, in partnership with the Atlantic provinces, and as part of the Atlantic Growth Strategy, IRCC recently launched the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Project.
Permanent immigration under three different programs: the Atlantic Intermediate Skilled Program, the Atlantic High Skilled Program, and the Atlantic International Graduate Program. The pilot offers priority processing for permanent residence applications and does not require participating employers to get a labor market impact assessment for jobs offered to skilled workers or international graduates under these new pilot programs. It draws on enhanced coordination to identify regional labor market needs and to endorse candidates that meet these needs. Under the pilot, every principal applicant will arrive in Atlantic Canada with a job offer and an individual settlement plan for both themselves and their accompanying family members, which will connect them to services known to support successful integration. Importantly, the pilot will test forward-looking approaches to settlement service delivery, together with a commitment from employers to foster welcoming workplaces and support settlement needs of newcomer employees and their families. On March 6th, we opened application intake with a commitment to process up to 2,000 applications for principal applicants and accompanying family members in 2017. To date, more than 250 employers in the region have been designated to take part in the pilot. IRCC has other programs that also benefit Atlantic Canada. For instance, under the Provincial Nominee Program, or PNP, participating provinces and territories develop economic immigration streams tailored to their labor market needs and nominate candidates on the basis of their ability to contribute to their regional economies. It has contributed to higher numbers of immigrants arriving in Atlantic Canada in recent years. For example, in 2005, only 1.5% of new immigrants to Canada were destined for any of the Atlantic provinces. By 2014, that percentage had more than doubled to 3.1%. Express Entry is Canada's flagship application management system for key economic immigration programs that attract high-skilled foreign workers who want to live in Canada. I would like to highlight some recent changes to Express Entry that will be of interest to your committee because of their relevance to Atlantic Canada. As of November 19, 2016, candidates working in Canada temporarily who were exempt from needing an LMIA, or Labour Market Impact Assessment, for their job will be able to carry over that exemption in Express Entry. This will help smooth the transition from temporary to permanent residence for many high-skilled candidates. Also, as of November 2016, additional points are awarded to candidates if they have completed education in Canada above the high school level. This is important given the number of high-quality post-secondary institutions in Atlantic Canada. International graduates are a key source of candidates in express entry because of their age, education, skills, experience with life in Canada, and established social networks. IRCC
As well, IRCC recently launched a new LMIA exemption stream of the International Mobility Program called Mobilité Francophone. High-skilled workers in this new stream will be able to acquire valuable Canadian work experience and then may benefit from the exemption from needing an LMIA for their permanent job offer to get additional points in express entry. Also, starting on June 6, 2017, express entry candidates with strong French language skills, with or without English language skills, will be awarded additional points. These important changes can help grow Francophone minority communities across Canada, including in Atlantic Canada. The provincial nominee program is also a potential avenue to permanent residency for French-speaking newcomers to the region, which has a large number of Francophone minority communities.
To reiterate, IRCC is acutely aware of the need for and interest in improving immigration to Atlantic Canada. IRCC welcomes your study and looks forward to reading your final report. We can now take questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anandasangre, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for joining us and for this presentation. I'd like to just start with respect to the issue of retention. I know this is about recruitment and entrance of newcomers to Atlantic Canada, but do you have any statistics as to the retention levels of new immigrants after 5 years of, for example, after 5 years of being in Atlantic Canada?
We do have some of those numbers, and it varies by program. I don't know if my colleague Umit would like to speak to that.
Yep. As you would anticipate, different programs will behave differently, immigrants in them. But overall, if you take the full set of immigrants, all newcomers, if you will, and again, methodologies differ from study to study, but we look at 5-year arrival, and we take the intended destination as the starting point. And when we look at that overall, in terms of the 4 provinces, we have a range starting from about 30% for PEI, all the way to 75% Nova Scotia. So that's the range. Newfoundland, Labrador will be 65, 63, 64. Other provinces will have definitely higher retention rates at this when we look at the full program. In other programs, there are much higher retention rates for the Atlantic, such as the Canadian Experience class. I know the numbers are small, but the retention is very high. Family class will have a very much higher retention rate, ranging between 85 to 73, 74%. So that's the family class. As you might also maybe anticipate why the rootedness and whatnot take factor.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is when I practiced law, a number of professionals who had initially been to the East Coast end up moving to Ontario once they get fully trained. So what part of the challenge is, how do we increase the retention rates, apart from just those that are coming in? How do we make sure that we increase those retention numbers? Because to me, 30, 40, 50% seems a little bit on the lower side. And for the amount of investment that it takes for us to bring someone in, it probably is better, we have them there for a longer period of time. I don't know if you have any ideas on that.
I think that's one of the key gaps that this program was really looking to fill, was there was the recognition that there are a number of programs that are already serving the Atlantic region, but this one was really meant to experiment with innovative ways to try and focus on that retention angle. And so that's one of the reasons that it's testing an employer-driven model, and also that employers really, before they can even become designated to recruit employees under the program, have to make a firm commitment in writing to declare that they will partner with a settlement agency and undertake to link people to those settlement supports, et cetera, and then look at how they're creating the most welcoming workplace possible. So it's really to try and get at that retention element with those. And I don't know if there's any more detail you want on that or not.
No, I think that's we can follow up on it afterwards. There's two specific incidents in Atlantic Canada I want to highlight. One is the 1985 arrival of Tamil boat refugees by Tamil by boat off St. John's, and then the 1987 arrival of Shelburne of about 160 Sikhs. I know one of the things that, in retrospect, looking back, is that was seen as an opportunity lost for people to be able to resettle there, because our initial response was to be shipping them out to Montreal and Toronto. Do you have any sense as to how refugees are now being welcomed into Atlantic Canada, and what kind of services are available, and what kind of numbers we are seeing in, the apart from the guards and so on, what kind of numbers we're seeing for refugee claimants?
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to reply to the question generally, I think Operation Syria was a game changer for Canada. And both in terms of government-assisted refugees as well as privately sponsored, I know that the 4 Atlantic provinces want to take as many as IRCC can provide to them. And so our settlement agencies in the Atlantic have been very creative in dealing with the volumes of refugees that arrived during Operation Syria, but are now very well positioned to continue to welcome newcomers. I think the 2017, the context now is quite different than from 85 and 87, as you explained. I would look to my colleague Umit to see if he has the data on the number of refugees that have arrived in the Atlantic. I think that actually that's another branch in our department that we could maybe provide that afterward, but he may have it with him.
Yeah, I do not have all the provinces altogether data. We can definitely provide these, but in terms of for instance, I'll just give you an example from New Brunswick. In terms of for 2016, in terms of resettled refugees, we have about 1,680. These are rounded numbers. And you also asked about the asylum claimants. So protected persons in Canada, it'll be 5 in terms of became permanent resident from an asylum claimant. But we have all this data available. Just maybe to add and connect the 2 questions, if I may, is that the retention rates, for instance, when you look at privately sponsored refugees, are much higher. Again, that's also pointing at the direction of family involvement and community welcoming nature, if you will. They all contribute towards the retention rates.
30 seconds.
I guess with respect to refugees again, what more can be done to ensure that that people who want to come to Canada look at Atlantic Canada as an option? Because I know oftentimes it's seen as Central Canada or West, and how do we make sure that people are able to go to Atlantic Canada? Because I know it's a very welcoming.
A very brief response, please.
The answer is employment. We know that if a refugee or a newcomer to the Atlantic or to any region of Canada can find employment, that will not only attract but also keep them there.
Thank you. Mr. Tilson, 7 minutes, please.
Yeah, it was interesting in your statement that recently released census data indicates that the population of Atlantic Canada is declining in the 15 to 64 age range and increasing in the number of senior citizens. I had the honor of attending the University of New Brunswick a long time ago, it seems, and it was the same way then. So there really is no change. So you're talking about the programs that you're putting forward, pilot and otherwise. They're obviously clearly not working. At least if these stats are accurate, and I assume they are, there hasn't been much change from when I was at university. So I guess the question is, why would immigrants come to the maritime provinces if there's no jobs? Because the young people are not staying there. They never have. They've taken off. When the oil business was booming out west, that's where they all went. And they go where there's jobs, and there's no jobs in the Maritimes. So I guess the question is, have you got any other ideas as to programs that would encourage not just immigrants, but the young people to stay?
So Tilson, it would be presumptuous of me to reply, given we have ministers from both New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island about to meet you after we leave this committee. And they would be much better positioned to explain to you the economic situation in those two provinces. I can tell you, though, that the seasonal nature of work in the Atlantic has not been a plus for the Atlantic provinces. The resource pull to Western Canada has not helped. But you would be pleased to hear that in terms of sector in particular, there's some very exciting news coming out of Atlantic Canada these days. And I would leave it to the ministers and their team that's here today.
Mr. Chairman, I would those would conclude my questions, so I'd give my time to Ms. Stubbs.
Ms. Stubbs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'd like to move that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to appear to testify before committee and explain the discrepancy between government claims that closing the Vegreville Immigration Case Processing Centre was done for budgetary reasons and the new information showing that it was not. So I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to be here today to advocate for the employees of Case Processing Centre Vegreville, 76% of which happen to be women, for their families, their community members, and for the town itself. In December, I had the opportunity to address this committee, and I'm here once again to present new facts and new information that Liberal members of Parliament, Liberal ministers, Liberal political staff, and senior departmental officials have refused to acknowledge or share with Canadians. I also hope this isn't the last opportunity that opposition MPs will have to raise issues from constituents and on behalf of all Canadians directly in committee without a time limit. So why is this motion important, and why should it be supported by every member of this committee? And the reason is because the Liberals have been dishonest with Canadians about the costs, and the minister needs to set the record straight. Last week, Global News revealed startling information that's in direct contradiction to what senior Liberals have been saying all along, and that's that the decision to rip 280 jobs out of Vegreville, Alberta would save money and would be better for taxpayers. But now all Canadians know that that's just not the case. So let's go back to October 27th, 2016, if we could, almost 7 months to the day, when employees, again, 76% of which are women and who the Prime Minister has pledged to support, were told that the exemplary, hardworking, efficient office was being closed and moved to Edmonton by December 31st, 2018. For 7 months, hardworking employees were told reason after reason after reason for this closure. Excuses were made up as we went along. The reasons changed. The most alarming claim was claims about efficiency and performance problems, but the most consistent claim all the way along from multiple ministers and members of Parliament and senior officials was that the decision would be cost effective, that it would incur cost savings, and that it would be about the responsible management of taxpayers' dollars. But employees, town officials, business owners, and community members were confused, of course, because this edict came as a complete shock to every single one of them, since they weren't consulted, they weren't asked to provide costing or upgrade options in the current facility. There, of course, was no consultation with anybody impacted by this decision. So I wrote the former Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship a letter the day after this reckless and unjustifiable decision was announced. I asked him to reconsider, to look at all the facts that had so blatantly and obviously been overlooked. And here was his response.
and I'll quote him, "Canadians expect their government to make responsible decisions on spending that will address current challenges, account for future situations, and ensure tax dollars are spent on quality services to meet expectations of clients and provide program excellence. The relocation will also save money. This relocation will also save money, as the new office space will be located within the Government of Canada's existing property inventory." He wasn't the only one to talk about costing, of course. The MP for Edmonton Centre, where the jobs will be moving, wrote the following to a resident from Vegreville. He said, quote, "Thank you for writing to me about the Vegreville CPC closure. It is always a pleasure to speak with constituents. Open dialogue is a vital part of my job. I understand yours and your community's concerns. Canadians expect their government to make responsible decisions on government spending that will address current challenges, account for future situations, and that will ensure middle-class tax dollars are spent on quality services to meet expectations of clients and to provide program excellence." But most residents were confused and left wondering, quite obviously, how can it be that rent, operating costs, construction costs, renovation costs, relocation costs, and buyouts would be cheaper than operating in Vegreville? And of course, now we know that the internal government department documents have shown all along, and now we know the facts, it's not. So those internal documents detail how much more it will be to operate in Edmonton. In an email dated April 19th, 2016, two senior department officials realized the cost discrepancy and were crafting statements, obviously for themselves and for politicians to use. The first one said this, quote, "Public Services and Procurement Canada conducted an investment analysis report based on the 280 FTEs in Vegreville and 312 FTEs in Edmonton over a 5-year period. The cost to the Crown if Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada remains in Vegreville would be approximately $7 million, with the majority of this for rent and no additional fit-up required. The cost to the Crown if Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada moved to Edmonton and increased its capacity to 312 FTEs, only 32 new positions, by the way, over a 5-year period would be $22.6 million. The move to Edmonton would result in higher costs due to an increase in capacity from 280 to 312 FTEs, the fit-up and rent costs for the additional capacity, as well as an actual increase in the rental rate per square meter associated with occupying space in downtown Edmonton, something that the common sense of the residents around Vegreville or any rural community in Canada could probably have guessed. The quote goes on to say, "It is important to note that as part of PSPC's overall analysis of available options, that over a 25-year life cycle for space, the overall cost to the Crown to relocate to Edmonton would be $46.6 million versus a cost of $35.8 million to remain in our current location in Vegreville." So this information clearly confirms the move will cost taxpayers more, both in the short term and in the long term. And as a reminder, over a 5-year period, the cost to the Crown to operate in Edmonton will be over $22 million. To remain in Vegreville will cost $7 million, detailing a difference of almost $16 million in just 5 years. Startlingly, the estimated fit-up in Vegreville for the same timeline is, and it's going to sound crazy because it's so far apart, but it's $25,144 versus a cost of $4.9 million in Edmonton. This is a stark difference, especially when you're talking about closing down an office in Vegreville that, according to the latest stats, the department itself confirms exceeded departmental standard targets of 80% by 93% and 97% respectively for applications and extensions for applications. But John McCallum and the MP for Edmonton Centre weren't the only ones to be dishonest with Canadians. On November 29th, 2016, the former parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship participated in a late show debate with me. I raised specific concerns with him regarding the lack of business case, the lack of consultation, the lack of an economic impact assessment, and the lack of answers from the minister. So just for you, I'll read his response in full. "Madam Speaker, I thank my colleague across the aisle for her important advocacy on this issue on behalf of her constituents in Vegreville. To respond to the increased demand in various business lines and to expand the operations of the IRCC, the department has made the difficult but necessary decision to relocate the Vegreville Case Processing Centre to Edmonton. Canadians expect any government, including this government, to make responsible decisions on government spending that will ensure that taxpayers' dollars are spent on quality service that address current challenges and future needs." He said, the member opposite has raised the issue of whether there is a business case. My comments are indeed directed at addressing that very concern. In fact, the Minister of Immigration has stated that the department intends to expand its operations in Alberta in the coming years, creating in aggregate more jobs for Albertans. That's my first point. With 42% of the current staff of Vegreville reaching retirement age in the next 5 years, the move to Edmonton will make it easier to recruit and retain qualified bilingual employees to meet the growing current and future needs. To date, the recruitment efforts to replace staff have been unsuccessful. None of these are true claims, by the way, but anyway, this was the case even under the former government. Needless to say, the inability to recruit new staff combined with the reduction in the workforce due to retirement is a serious challenge. With fewer employees, service to clients will certainly be impacted. I guess the service of consistently exceeding the departmental targets is not sufficient. That, again, he said, buttresses the business case. Between October 2015 and September 2016, 17% of the staff in Vegreville left the workforce. And he said to me, as the member opposite well knows, the letter she received from the Minister of Immigration on November 17 stipulated that there were ongoing tenant issues at the current location in Vegreville, with almost 200 service calls made since 2013 to fix the heating, cooling, sanitary, and plumbing issues, again, during the tenure of the previous government. By the way, the landlord had completed all of those concerns. But once again, he said these are issues that the previous government was unable to resolve. This move, he said, this move will save taxpayers money because the new office will be located on premises owned by the Government of Canada. Although the move from Vegreville to Edmonton makes business sense, he claimed, based on current and future needs, the member needs to understand that it was not a decision made without great consideration of the impact it would have on employees, as well as their constituents in the community of Vegreville. Employees were advised well in advance of this relocation, and efforts are underway to ensure that the impacts on staff are minimized. He said, I have great concern for the issues the member has outlined with respect to families. We are concerned and sensitive to the needs and problems that families are facing with the challenges they are undergoing in every facet of our economy, particularly in Vegreville and the member's constituency. The management of IRCC will continue to work closely with staff throughout this transition period. The positions in the relocated office will have the same work descriptions they have now, and so the current indeterminate employees will be able to retain their jobs, which of course doesn't make any sense if one of the rationale is that the performance is bad, so therefore the office needs to be shut down, right? But it doesn't make any sense because it's all false. Business will continue as usual throughout the transition. As I have said, he said, Canadians expect their government to manage taxpayer dollars well, even if that means making difficult decisions. And this is the decision that we had to take, a case, of course, the government has not made. I would also note, he said, that the Minister of Immigration has reached out to the member for Lakeland to meet with respect to Vegreville and to address her concerns and questions. The Minister's office has yet to hear from the member. We will continue to show leadership and continue to deliver for Albertans. His second rebuttal included the same information about costing, which is what we're here to discuss today. He said, Madam Speaker, we appreciate the efforts and advocacy by the member opposite. However, fiscal prudence and sound management of Canadian public finances is something that the party of the member opposite stands for. It is something that this government is working towards and is trying to implement with this decision. We are expected to make responsible decisions on government spending involving taxpayer dollars and to ensure that those taxpayer dollars are spent on quality services that address current challenges and future needs. So let me summarize, just to be clear. Just like the former minister, John McKellen, the former parliamentary secretary, still our colleague, said point blank, quote, this move will save taxpayers money. That's false. It's completely untrue. He also said, quote, we are expected to make responsible decisions on government spending involving taxpayer dollars and to ensure that those taxpayer dollars are spent on quality services that address current challenges and future needs. But it's clear, plain as day to everybody, that this decision simply was not responsible. And it flies in the face of everything the Liberals say they are all about. There was no consultation. And early on, in a direct response to the union, senior department officials, when they were asked straight out whether or not there was a cost analysis, said no. There was no economic impact assessment. So, of course, there could be no supposed business case. And I'm not sure what dictionary the Liberals are using, but their definition of responsible doesn't seem to make any sense. On October 27th, during that announcement to employees and to town officials who were not initially invited to the announcement and found out through text messages from employees at CPC Vegreville, senior IRCC official Robert Orr was asked by an employee if a business case or an economic impact assessment was completed. The response was no. So for months, my office, the town of Vegreville, union representatives, the NDP MLA for the area have asked the minister's office and the department for any information to substantiate the claims the officials have made publicly and the claims Liberal MPs and ministers have made publicly. I don't know why this is making you smile, but we asked for information including costing, studies, consultations, and building maintenance. Through ATIPs and order paper questions, the Liberals provided cherry-picked information, redacted documents, and information that didn't even make sense. As recently as May 9th, 2017, the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, an MP in Edmonton, claimed there is an impact on that community. We don't deny that, but there's also a compelling business case. How can there be a compelling business case without a cost analysis? That's an obvious question that all of us were asking. But now we know, of course, there was actually a cost analysis. There was an internal government cost analysis, and it proves, now that we all have seen the documents, that everything the Liberals have said publicly about this decision being required to save taxpayers' money and being cost-effective is not true. It's completely false. So we'll talk a little bit about the messaging. The messaging, which internal documents reveal, was sent to the minister's office for approval. It includes the specific talking points that, quote, the relocation will also save money, end quote, and, quote, Canadians expect the government to make responsible decisions on government spending, end quote. And it's been said time and time again by the former minister, the former parliamentary secretary, the minister of infrastructure, the member of parliament from Edmonton Centre, and even the current minister of immigration, refugees, and citizenship. On February 14th of this year, for whom I have a great deal of respect, but on February 14th of this year, the minister responded to me in question period saying, quote, our government has a responsibility to make decisions on government spending of the hard-earned middle-class tax dollars. But this is not responsible, and the answers, until Canadians could all see the internal documents, have not been honest. These talking points, prepared by both senior departmental staff and Liberal political staff, prepared Liberal politicians and put them out in public to be dishonest with Canadians about this so-called responsible spending of their tax dollars in the closure of this office. Where is the transparency about the costing? Where is the transparency that this government promised? The Liberals have publicly claimed honesty and transparency are key pillars of their mandate. So here's some other phrases from the former minister's mandate letter. Our platform offered a new ambitious plan for a strong and growing middle class, which, of course, the strong and growing middle class in Vegreville will be harmed with the closure of the CPC. We made a commitment to invest in growing our economy, strengthening the middle class, and helping those working hard to join it. I guess that only counts if you're in an economy in major city centres. If we are to tackle the real challenges we face as a country, Canadians need to have faith in their government's honesty and willingness to listen. But it's quite clear there's been no honesty and no listening on this decision to close the Vegreville Case Processing Centre. And as Minister, the Prime Minister said, you will be held accountable for our commitment to bring a different style of leadership to government. This will include close collaboration with your colleagues, meaningful engagement with opposition members of Parliament, and by the way, it was said publicly a number of times by the Minister and others that they had spoken to me and met with me when they hadn't. Parliamentary committees, and the public service. Constructive dialogue with Canadians, civil society and stakeholders, including business, organized labor, the broader public sector, and the not-for-profit and charitable sectors, and identifying ways to find solutions and avoid escalating conflicts unnecessarily. Of course, we know no constructive dialogue with the employees or the stakeholders in Vegreville happened, and not-for-profit sectors, charitable sectors, public servants, businesses, citizens will all be harmed in Vegreville and the region because of the closure of this office. But this is just another example, and obviously one that hits home very deeply and strongly for me, of the Liberals saying one thing and then doing the complete opposite. So I'm appealing to my colleagues to hold your government to your own promises. And the answers to my questions, the multiple questions from our interim leader, Rona Ambrose, the questions of 12 of my Conservative colleagues, 12 of them in the House of Commons, in the Senate, in committees. Those responses to our questions have all failed to share the facts. They've all obscured the fact that we now know that this closure will cost Canadians tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars more. And the responses to those questions included this complete bold-faced lie that this decision would save taxpayers money. It will cost Canadians more. We know that now. And it will cost a loss of up to 420 people from the community of Vegreville. It will cost Canadians more to close this office, and it will remove 9% of the town's labor force. It will cost Canadians more to close this office, and it will cost the town $15.9 million of GDP. It will cost Canadians more, and it will cost the town $14.5 million of labor income. It will cost Canadians more and result in a loss of $1.2 million in municipal revenue to the town of Vegreville annually. It will cost Canadians more and cost employees, specifically the 76% of employees who are women in particular, forcing them to choose between families, their community, their volunteer commitments, and a career. It will cost Canadians more to close this office, and it will impact over 250 spouses' jobs in Vegreville. It will cost Canadians more to close this office, and it will impact the 3 locally owned small businesses in Vegreville owned by employee families. It will cost Canadians more to close this office and cause businesses to close their doors. It will cost Canadians more to close this office and impact 350 school-aged children in Vegreville. It will cost Canadians more and cost employees thousands in moving costs and relocation expenses. It will cost Canadians more to close this office and force double the houses to go on the market in Vegreville. Here's a letter from a constituent who outlines the supposed business case. Quote, the devastating news delivered today by Mr. Robert Orr at a town hall meeting for the staff of the Case Processing Centre in Vegreville has sent shockwaves throughout our community. Mr. Orr said it was a business decision to relocate the centre to Edmonton, address unknown, we know now, in Edmonton Centre, and announced after an hour of telling us how wonderful our work was, how much they appreciated the way we pitch in whenever we are asked, and how great our contribution to the charitable giving campaign was. Then Mr. Orr made his announcement and promptly pointed the finger of blame at Public Services and Procurement for their decision. Nobody from that department was there to take responsibility or redirect it to you. Considering the Phoenix fiasco, it's not a surprise. Mr. Orr and Mr. Armstrong reminded us that behind every application is a real person. Well, Minister McCallum, behind every position number on the Vegreville org chart is a real person who has directly contributed to your touted success. We are tax-paying public servants. We are the people who make you look good. What about us? Client service is of the utmost importance, they said. That's more fantasy than fact. Ask the spousal applicants if it looks like we think client service is important when their wait times for first-stage decisions increased threefold when those applications were moved from Vegreville to Mississauga. And by the way, all of those backed-up applications earlier this year, I think around February, were sent back to Vegreville to be caught up because they got backlogged in Mississauga. Ask the hundreds of foreign nationals whose applications, yes, they announced they're shutting down the office in October, but they sent files back to catch them in February. It's brutal. Ask the hundreds of foreign nationals whose applications are processed incorrectly by the ongoing cycles of casual staff at OSC who don't even make it through the learning curve before their jobs are over. If it looks like we think client service is a priority, why does it have to be an all or none approach on your relocation idea? From what Mr. Orr said, there is and will continue to be lots of work. Leaving the permanent residence lines of business, including all the spousal applications at the CPC in Vegreville, and shifting some of the temporary residence lines of business to Edmonton makes the most sense. Mr. Orr's argument on the cost of leasing space in Edmonton versus Vegreville was not credible. You can see how the common sense rural constituents could see this right away, right? It didn't make any sense. Our local mayor and councillors who rushed to attend the meeting were shocked as well, not having been approached by anyone from PSPC to inquire about lease agreements. Also not credible was his point on the numbers of CPC Vegreville employees who will be seeking retirement soon. With so many unemployed oil patch workers in our province, the spouses are now the main breadwinners in many cases and staying in the workforce longer. The scope of this motion is to discuss costing and the inaccurate information that the Liberals have been providing Canadians. But the reality is so many other justifications for this decision are also false. And if they are being dishonest about this one extremely important fact about whether or not simply clear as day this decision would save taxpayers' dollars, which we know now it won't, how can Canadians possibly trust anything that is said about this decision. I hope that concerns every single Liberal member at this committee, and I hope you'll ask hard questions about it. I'd like to share a letter from the landlord of the Case Processing Centre of Vegreville discussing the discrepancy in costs between the two locations. We are commenting on Mr. McCallum's letter dated November 30th, 2016 to Ms. Robin Benson, Public Service Alliance, Ottawa. Paragraphs 2 and 3 as follows. Canadians expect their government to make responsible decisions on spending that will address current challenges, account for future situations, and ensure tax dollars are spent on quality services to meet expectations of clients and provide program excellence. The relocation will also, quote, save money, as the new office space will be located within the Government of Canada's existing property inventory. There are millions of dollars that will have to go to relocation costs, abandoning existing infrastructure and tenant improvements, new equipment and tenant improvements, and cost of training new staff, doubling of rent, totaling approximately $45 million over 25 years. The relocation space is within Government of Canada's existing property inventory due to Public Works and Government Service vacating its tenancy at Canada Place and relocating in ATB Plaza North, some of the most expensive office space in Edmonton, thus leaving space empty for years. Is that ensuring taxpayer dollars are spent wisely? It would have made sense to have PWGSC moved back to the premises in Canada Place. Apparently, there was a decision by PWGSC to keep tenancy at Canada Place that had business in general with the public. But this is an important fact that this resident made. And I want to make here and make sure that you all know this. CPC Vegreville is a case processing center that has no personal contact with the public. It's not a walk-in frontline client-facing service office. Public Works occupied Canada Place prior to their move for years and could have returned to save money. PSAC, the union that represents 280 employees at CPC Vegreville, and CEIU, a component of PSAC, released the following news release in response to the facts about the costing finally coming to light. They said, quote, with recent revelations that moving the Vegreville Case Processing Centre to Edmonton will cost taxpayers millions extra, the union representing workers at the Vegreville Case Processing Centre is reaffirming the call to reverse the closure and to invest in rural Canadian communities. We have repeatedly asked the Immigration Minister to back up his claims with the numbers related to costs and savings, but all we received was redacted documents, said Eddie Bork, National President of the Canada Employment and Immigration Union, the component of the Public Service Alliance of Canada that represents the majority of workers at Case Processing Centre Vegreville. Quote, now we know what he knew all along. This move is entirely political. Global News chief political correspondent David Akin first broke the news on Wednesday, referencing an internal costing analysis from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. The documents show Ottawa will spend $46.6 million on renovations and leasing in Edmonton, compared to $35.8 million to upgrade the existing facility in Vegreville. Marianne Halidoun, Regional Executive Vice President for the Public Service Alliance of Canada Prairie Region, said it never made sense to take a long-standing, high-functioning office out of a small rural community and move it to a major metropolitan city. Alleged savings aside, which now we know there are none, the loss of qualified, capable workers and the combined years of experience would be devastating to the services that Canadians rely on. Yesterday, MP Ralph Goodale answered questions in the House of Commons defending the relocation with claims of a 20% vacancy rate in Vegreville. This is still within the PSAC press release. Quote, we are 100% confident that if IRCC offered indeterminate employment instead of precarious term employment, they could easily fill any vacancies, including bilingual, said Halidoun. This is just another example of face saving from the Liberal government. The department plans to shutter the CPC in Vegreville and move the centre to Edmonton, over 100 kilometres away, forcing employees to relocate, commute over 3 hours each day, or quit the jobs they love. With 280 workers, about 5% of the town's population, it has been one of the largest employers in Vegreville for over 20 years. So union officials, town officials, community members, employees, municipal, provincial, and federal representatives from all parties have all questioned the Liberals on this unfounded, unjustifiable removal of sustainable, well-paying jobs, the exact kind of federal public service jobs that are sustainable in rural communities because they're administrative and processing. And this attack on rural Canada. To claim this is a responsible use of taxpayer dollars is a slap in the face to the employees, to community members, to Albertans, and to all Canadians who have trusted this government to make honest and transparent decisions on their behalf. And I think often of the people in Vegreville in the area who actually voted Liberal, because on January 26, 2013, the Prime Minister visited Vegreville on a leg of his Alberta campaign tour. It might have been one of the only stops he made in the entire region, but at the Vegreville train station, he told people in my riding, looked them in the faces and said, quote, "This country is not about picking and choosing the areas that you think you might be popular in. It's about connecting and building a broad sense of where this country needs to go." This government, as we've all seen by now, may have a hard time keeping track of its promises to Canadians, but the people of Vegreville will not forget this. And the woman who hosted that event with the Prime Minister, she stood up in December at a town hall in Vegreville and cried and said she regretted hosting that event and felt this responsibility and guilt towards her community members for having enabled him to look them in their faces and say that. And now to stand by while this current minister continues to allow this unjustified and unfounded decision that's been lied about for 7 months to go ahead. The Prime Minister also said that, quote, "There is something big happening in politics again, and maybe there's room for each of us to get involved. But this decision to remove 280 rural jobs and lying to Canadians about the millions more of their tax dollars that will go into moving the centre is a clear example of the Prime Minister telling people one thing and doing something else." And so, again, given that this motion is to ask the Liberals to be responsible for the gap between what they've said about the cost justifying this decision and the facts that we all know, which is that it will cost millions more. I once again just want to put in perspective on behalf of the people I represent what this job losses means. So this would be the equivalent of the job losses if you were to remove this size of office from other centers. So from Charlottetown, it would be the same as losing 3,158 jobs. From St. John, it would be the same as losing 6,257 jobs. From St. John's, it would be the same as losing 9,647 jobs. From Regina, it would be the same as losing 10,312 jobs. From Halifax, it would be the same as cutting 19,117 jobs. And I know my grandmother, who is the first female mayor of Dartmouth, well, we probably differed ideologically, would be proud of me today, I think. And cutting these 280 jobs from Vegreville would be like removing 35,754 jobs from Winnipeg. It would be like removing 56,807 jobs from Edmonton. It would be like cutting 59,499 jobs from Calgary. It would be like cutting 60,551 jobs from Ottawa. It would be like cutting 113,299 jobs from Vancouver. It would be like cutting 187,298 jobs from Montreal. It would be like cutting 273,440 jobs from Toronto. With no consultation, with no cost analysis, apparently, except now we know there was one the entire time that said this move would cost taxpayers no, with more, unlike what the Liberals have been saying for 7 months. With no economic impact analysis, closing an office that has consistently exceeded departmental targets over and over and over. I hope that this concerns all members of this committee. Thank you to the NDP for also advocating on behalf of the employees in Vegreville and the town and the region. As you know, the members of all of the political parties in the provincial legislature in Alberta are united on this. They're all calling for the reversal of this closure. So are municipal representatives right across Canada. And of course, my Conservative colleagues have supported the town of Vegreville and been champions and advocates for the people there, both in the Senate and in the House of Commons at the very highest levels of our party, and enabling me to do things like this to advocate on behalf of our constituents. constituents. So I hope that you will support the motion to achieve accountability and transparency and to question why there has been such a discrepancy between the claims that have been made about this closure and the facts that we now know, which are that this will cost Canadian taxpayers millions of dollars more, and it won't save money, and it's not responsible, and it is unjust.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Mr. Tabar.
I move now that the debate be adjourned so that we can hear from our witnesses that have been patiently waiting.
So we have a motion before us to adjourn. All those in
Recorded vote.
recorded vote.
The motion is that the debate be now adjourned. Mr. Hernandez-Sangre. Monsieur Arsenault. Mr. Sampson. Mr. Tabara. Ms. Zahid. Ms. Rempel.
No.
Ms. Stubbs. Mr. Tilson.
No.
Ms. Kwan.
The result is 5-4. The debate is adjourned. And Ms. Kwan, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to spend a couple of my minutes to speak to the Vegreville situation. And actually, I do think this is a critical issue. We're just talking about jobs and retention and economic activities in Atlantic Canada provinces. Just imagine that for 1 minute and what that means if those kinds of implications and impacts were to happen in the Atlantic provinces, in any one of those cities. And I would suspect that all the provincial ministers that are here would not support it. I would suspect that the MPs from those regions would not support it. And so here we are, we have this situation where people are being devastated, and they are being devastated. And I should also say this as well. Vegreville, the processing center, they do exemplary work. If we do this, the potential loss in terms of experience that they bring to the table in helping us get the cases processed, helping government get the cases processed, would be over 2,000 hours of experience. 2,000 years. 2,000 years of experience. That is significant in the context of the huge backlogs that we're dealing with. And by the way, there's been cases where there's backlogs in Ontario, Mississauga, where they actually send boxes of files over to Vegreville to get them to process them. That is the stuff that we're trying to push through with respect to processing on spousal applications, and where there's been enormous delays because of that. It's the Vegreville people who's helping push this stuff through. So the government wants to actually reduce the wait times for spousal applications to, a 2-year limit. You better think twice about doing this. Losing, to 1 year, the 1 year processing time limit, you better think twice in actually doing this, because you will lose thousands upon thousands of years of experience in terms of that work, and that would only hamper the government's effort in achieving their goals. So I've written to the minister about this, and I've gotten a stock answer about why they have to proceed. They don't have to proceed. And this is a nonpartisan issue. It is a nonpartisan issue. It is about our economy. It's about the immigration system. It's about getting the work done and using the best talents to get that work done. So let's rethink it. I think I'm going to blow all my 7 minutes. But, you know, I do want to say this. I haven't had a chance to really get into this debate a whole lot because of the limitations of what the NDP gets by way of time in questions and so on. But this is a critical issue for Vegreville. But I say more than that, it's a critical issue for the immigration system, for processing times. And just think about it for 1 minute. Nobody, and I would think that the government members as well as the officials would say that this is okay if we were to do this in the Atlantic provinces. So why would we want to do this to Vegreville and to a community that is strong, and a community that is proud, and a community that is contributing in every sense of the word, both all of us in the work that we need to do, but to our overall economy for our country. So I would support this motion, and because it was non-debatable around adjourning, I don't get to speak to it, but I just want to spend a few minutes on that. I guess while we're on this track, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on another motion, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to move that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, that the committee immediately undertake a study of land arrivals at Canada's southern border, including the impact of current realities at the border on safety and security of both refugees and Canadian society, the effective management of refugee claims at the border within the context of Canada's international human rights obligations, and how to ensure an efficient and effective refugee determination process. That this study should be comprised of no less than 5 meetings, that IRCC department officials be in attendance for at least one of the meetings, that CVSA officials be in attendance for at least one of the meetings, and that the RCMP officials be in attendance for at least one of the meetings, and that the study be concluded, and that the committee report its findings to the House prior to June 9, 2017, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response thereto. Mr. Chair, you'll remember this is the motion that I had moved and has been adjourned, I believe 3 times, if not 4, and so I'm going to move that we actually resume debate on this. I would really just like to get an answer from the government members so that we can get on with the study, so that we can schedule the study to get this important work done. So to that end, I'm going to move resuming debate with respect to that motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. As you're aware, it's a dilatory motion, so it's not debatable. So we will move to a vote.
A recorded vote, please.
Recorded vote.
The motion is to proceed to the motion moved on April 10th, 2017. Mr. Hernandez-Sangri. The motion is to move to now proceed to the motion moved on April 10th, 2017. Mr. Arsenault. Mr. Sampson.
No.
Mr. Tabara. No. Ms. Zahid. No. Ms. Rempel.
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs.
Yes.
Mr. Tilson.
Yes.
Ms. Kwan.
Yes.
5 to 4.
The motion's defeated, 5 to 4.
Thank you.
Start the clock.
All right, I'm going to ask a quick question, if I may then.
Yes.
Of the officials. So we just heard about the situation with Vegreville. So if a processing center as such was closed in the Atlantic provinces, the impact we've heard from Charlottetown would be the loss of 3,158 jobs would be equivalent to that. For St. John's, it would be 6,257, and then also St. John's at 9,647. So we're talking about economic activities and the critical aspect of that. Would you agree that that is not something you would want to see with the Atlantic provinces, to have such an implication with policies from governments impacting the economic viability of the towns and the cities and the provinces in the Atlantic provinces?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, that would be a topic that we would think would be a government opinion or decision to weigh in on.
Please proceed.
Yes, of course it would. And I would say that if the minister would actually agree to come to this committee and to answer questions from the opposition on the budgetary items, we would actually maybe be able to get an answer. I was hoping that maybe the officials would be able to say to us that if government were forced to think about this kind of things, that would be something that they would not do to any one community. With that, I understand your position and you're not able to answer that question. Let me then turn to this question. We have a government Atlantic growth strategy. And in fact, they have established a leadership committee that's comprised of premiers of the 4 Atlantic provinces, as well as 5 members of the federal cabinet. The federal cabinet include the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Minister responsible for Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, the President of Treasury Board, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, and the Minister of Fishery, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard, and as well as the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. But it does not include the Minister of Immigration. And we're talking about immigration policy that would impact that. Why is that? Can anybody answer that question, or is that too much of a political question and only the minister can answer, which if he chose to show up, he would be able to?
I can respond to the fact that the Minister of Immigration is on the list of ministers who will be invited to some of the Leadership Committee meetings, but again, the actual composition of the Leadership Committee would be a government decision, but the Minister of Immigration and other ministers are invited to some of the meetings.
Right. Well, it seems strange to me. We actually are dealing with a study for this committee with respect to the growth of Atlantic provinces vis-a-vis immigration growth, and yet that leadership is not on that committee, not as an invited guest to come and sort of offer some comments, but as part of a
20
member
seconds.
to drive the initiative to make sure that we yield the results that we want. So it makes this study, frankly, somewhat disingenuous in terms of that, when the government themselves is got a strategy going, and the minister and the prime minister deliberately choose not to put the immigration minister at that table.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Ms. Zaid, you have 7 minutes. I understand you'll be splitting your time with Mr. Samson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. My first question is, are there any elements of the Atlantic immigration pilot that, if successful, could be applied to focus on rural communities that are facing some of the same demographic challenges as of Atlantic Canada?
Yes, certainly. I think we'll be looking at different elements of the pilot as it rolls out, and we definitely need to evaluate the results as we go. But I think looking at the unique settlement components, the components focused on retention, as well as the fact that there are the rural areas that have different needs than the urban areas, that certainly is a possibility.
My next question is, although the immigration levels to Atlantic Canada have been traditionally low, but they welcomed 11.5% of the Syrian refugees that arrived between 4th November 2015 and 30th September 2016. Do we have any sense of how many have stayed in the region, and can we build on that capacity for other refugee resettlement initiatives?
Mr. Chair, I think we certainly can draw on the lessons learned from the settlement of refugees in the Atlantic region, and I would turn to my colleague Umit to see if there are any statistics readily available or if we would need to undertake to bring that back.
Yeah, we do follow and monitor, as you know, different immigrant groups in terms of their retention rates, but it's too early for us in terms of the tools that we use to understand how many are staying or will stay, if you will. The initial studies, the research that we are getting from the region, from the academics, indicate, and in fact there are 3 research projects in the region taking place by using the SSHRC and IRCC joint Special Syria Rapid Impact Research that was established. They are basically monitoring in terms of their settlement services, the currently in the region, GARs and privately sponsored refugees are accessing settlement services that we know, the ones who have established there from the beginning. But 2 years, 3 years from now, how many will stay? It's very hard to tell. But we will have the tools and means to monitor and to report on those rates.
Thank you, and I will pass it on to my colleague, Mr. Sampson.
Merci beaucoup et merci pour votre...
Thank you for being here and for your statements. I have a question about the level of francophones in Canada and in the Atlantic region. The target for your department was a 4% increase for francophones over the last 10 years, and we've seen the actual increase has been 1.4%. This is a failure over the last 10 years. How can you be sure that this pilot will ensure that we can have this increase in francophone presence in the Atlantic region as well as elsewhere in Canada? Thank you for your question. The department is aware of the target and all of the efforts that have been made to date. And in fact, we are bringing more efforts to bear in order to meet the target on time, and maybe even more francophone immigration than the target. We do have the Destination Canada program. An initiative to bring francophones from all over the world to Canada each autumn. We have also created a process in Canada to work with Francophone communities outside Quebec, to work with employers. As I said earlier, the best way to attract and retain immigrants is by offering them the possibility of getting a job. We are working with our network throughout Canada in order to find jobs in communities. We are also working with service providers in order to create by and for programs so that immigrants arriving in Canada can find settlement and integration services in French. Thus, this is a multi-pronged approach with service providers, with our partners in the provinces and territories. And for the first time, on the 30th of March of this year, the Ministers of Immigration and La Francophonie met in Moncton for the first time. To address the issue of Francophone immigration and to work jointly to find ways to increase the number of Francophones in Canada, and not only to increase the number of immigrants arriving, but to also retain them. Some provinces have much more ambitious targets than the 4.4% target, such as New Brunswick and Manitoba. We are also working closely with those ministries so that we may meet our target. Thank you.
Officials for appearing before our committee as we launch into our study on immigration in Atlantic Canada. We will now suspend for 2 minutes to allow the next panel to assemble. Thank you. And we will now resume our study on M39, Immigration to Atlantic Canada. I'd like to welcome before the committee from the Government of New Brunswick, Mr. Donald Arsenault, the Minister of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour. Welcome. Mr. Charles Ailes, Assistant Deputy Minister, Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour, Population Growth Division. Welcome. And from the Government of Prince Edward Island, Mr. Sony Gallant, the Minister of Workforce and Advanced Learning, Mr. Neil Stewart, Deputy Minister, Workforce and Advanced Learning, and Ms. Abby McPherson, Director and Senior Operations Manager. Welcome. And I assume it's Mr. Arsenault that will be speaking on behalf of the Government of New Brunswick. The floor is yours. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor and a privilege to be here in front of your committee. A special shout to my own MP, MP Arsenault, as well as our New Brunswick MP, Elena Lockhart, and also, no doubt, my colleague from PI, Minister Gallant. Our government is working on some very important immigration initiatives, and I'm looking forward to speaking about them today. As a government, we are focused on creating the right conditions for New Brunswickers to thrive and for the private sector to create jobs and grow the economy. Le Nouveau-Brunswick est une petite province.
New Brunswick is a small province, and we have an aging population. This is amplified by significant youth outmigration and a decrease in natural population growth, with deaths now surpassing births in the province. The 2016 census highlighted our declining population, with New Brunswick being the only province to record a population drop from 2011 to 2016. Recent research suggests that low or negative population growth is expected across most areas of the province, except Moncton, St. John, and Fredericton.
That low or negative population growth is expected across most areas of the province except for Moncton, St. John, and Fredericton. People leaving New Brunswick for other provinces continues to be a primary reason for low or negative population growth rates, especially in rural areas. This is closely tied to unemployment in New Brunswick while boosting the economies of other provinces. Going forward, immigration will continue to be a strong driver for offsetting these negative population growth trends. We need more people to build our workforce and create a better future right here in New Brunswick. New Brunswick NB Jobs regularly has 3,500 to 4,000 job postings for skilled labor throughout the province. According to recent LMI projections, over 9,000 jobs may need to be filled through immigration over the next 5 years, 2017 to 2021. That is why our government is committed to increasing the number of immigrants to our province. Historically, immigration to New Brunswick has been concentrated through our provincial nominee program, the PNP. Through the PNP, we're able to attract skilled workers and business immigrants that intend to settle, work, and raise a family in New Brunswick. Et il est très important d'accueillir de nouveaux.
It is very important to welcome new arrivals who speak French in order to maintain our linguistic balance. That is why we are making major efforts to attract and retain Francophone immigrants who want to settle and work in New Brunswick. Among other things, we are the first jurisdiction in the country to sign an agreement on immigration with the Trudeau government. And in that agreement, we are the only jurisdiction in the country with a Francophone access outside Quebec. In 2016, we surpassed our Francophone immigration goal, going from 24% of the total number of Francophone immigrants thanks to the New Brunswick nominee program, with our overall objective being 33%. In March 2017, we hosted the first forum on Francophone immigration. During this historic event, the ministers responsible for immigration and Canadian francophonie came together to study the sectors of possible collaboration in order to encourage Francophone immigration outside Quebec. We are currently preparing to launch a renewed entrepreneur immigration stream that will focus on increased business immigration to the province. To further our business immigration efforts, the province will continue to support our innovative business immigrant mentorship program and the Hive La Ruche program, which provide business immigrants with the tools necessary to establish a business and successfully settle in the province.
The province is piloting a Succession Connect program in Fredericton that will connect business immigrants with businesses for sale in New Brunswick. Our government believes it is essential to support settlement initiatives that assist the integration and retention of newcomers in communities throughout New Brunswick. We currently have 13 service provider organizations across New Brunswick, This ensures that newcomers have access to settlement services in communities throughout the province. It is important to encourage newcomers' participation in our provincial labour force and to show all New Brunswickers the value and benefits of a diverse and multicultural society. We believe in inclusive communities, support for all New Brunswick families, and investing in culture. Recent public opinion research produced by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada shows that residents of Atlantic Canada express more positive views on immigration and refugees compared to other regions of Canada. New Brunswick is proud to have supported the federal government's Syrian Refugee Initiative last year, welcoming over 1,500 Syrians to the province, the most per capita in the country of Canada. New Brunswick resettled more Syrian refugees per capita than any other province in Canada. It is important to maintain this momentum moving forward to continue to create welcoming communities for all newcomers and to increase the number of new immigrants coming to New Brunswick.
As part of this push for more immigration, New Brunswick played a key role in establishing the Atlantic Growth Strategy and negotiating the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, advocating for an Atlantic-wide strategy on immigration early on. Through the new Atlantic Immigration Pilot, the province will leverage growth opportunities to increase immigration and retain newcomers in New Brunswick. With the pilot, we have the potential to double the number of economic immigrants coming to New Brunswick. The province is expected to welcome an additional 646 families through the pilot. With the introduction of the pilot, the province has increased its focus on employer engagement and retention. Employers in New Brunswick have shown great interest in using immigration as a tool to meet their labor market needs. Now more than ever, we are working closely with New Brunswick employers in key sectors in order to recruit skilled workers that meet their labor market needs.
Have shown interest in the pilot in New Brunswick, with over 140 employers submitting designation applications, resulting in over 1,400 job opportunities. Our current retention rate is 72%, and we are looking to increase this to 80% with concentrated integration and retention efforts. To support these efforts, our government allocated an additional $2.5 million for pilot project-related activities, including increased employer engagement and support for settlement services. We have also launched a public awareness campaign, We Are All in New Brunswick, to educate all New Brunswickers on our current demographic and skilled labor challenges and on the benefits of immigration and creating welcoming communities to alleviate this situation. New Brunswick is looking forward to the many opportunities that this new pilot presents, including those offered by the pilot's international graduate stream, which will help our post-secondary education institutions attract and retain more international students to the province. Our government's increased focus on international students has led to several new initiatives, including enhanced engagement with universities and college to discuss immigration opportunities, a new language training service in Moncton specific to the needs of international students, and a new international student entrepreneur stream under the provincial nominee program that will encourage students to settle and start a business in the province. Même si qu'il n'existe aucune solution simple aux défis démographiques.
Although there is no simple solution to address the demographic challenges facing our province, we believe we have made significant progress and want to continue to encourage immigration growth to New Brunswick. We are particularly reassured by our recent growth in immigration allocations and wish to continue to see allocation increases in future that will meet the labor market demands of New Brunswick employers. It is important that with these allocation increases, we as a province continue to focus on the important aspects of settlement and retention. Going forward, by encouraging newcomers to settle in New Brunswick, we will accomplish our goal of creating jobs, growing the economy, and making New Brunswick the best place to live, work, and raise a family. To see our progress firsthand, we welcome you all to come to New Brunswick to learn more about our immigration efforts. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault.
Thank you, Chair. Bonjour, je suis remercié de nouveau invité.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again. We are very happy to be here representing Prince Edward Island, rather.
Views on this important matter. Am I on? Mm-hmm. We have two departments that have mandates related to population. My colleague, Minister McDonald, sends his regrets on not being able to attend today. His Department of Economic Development and Tourism includes the PEI Office of Immigration. As Workforce and Advanced Learning Minister, my mandate is to grow our population and workforce. Just last week, Premier McLaughlin announced a new population action plan for PEI, focusing on recruitment, retention, and repatriation, and rural economic development. In recent years, the story of PEI's population has been positive. Since 2007, driven by the strong international immigration, PEI has led Atlantic provinces in population growth. This influx of new islanders has contributed to our province in many ways, socially, culturally, and economically, and we are seeing this success. Our GDP grew by almost 2% in 2016, which was ahead of the national average by 1%. Manufacturing sales saw the highest growth among all provinces and outpaced the national average of 1%. Over the past 6 months, we have seen employment growth of 2.8%, the strongest in the country. Over the past 5 years, the total income from wages and salaries has grown steadily. We are on the right track, but we are also facing challenges. We must act now to slow and reverse two concerning trends: out-migration and an aging population. Our action plan leads out a path to do this, but we can't do it alone. It is a call to action to islanders, businesses, communities, and the federal government to help us reach our ambitious target, growing our population to 160,000 people by the end of 2022. This is over 10,000 more islanders in 5 years. Today, we have a couple of slides as we respond to the areas outlined in Motion 39. Canada experienced 5% population growth in 2016. PEI led Atlantic Canada in population growth. But we know Atlantic Canada still lagged behind the rest of Canada. We are concerned about the widening of this gap. Atlantic Canada had 10% of the nation's population 50 years ago, and today Atlantic Canada only has 6.6%. Like all provinces, the aging of the population is concerning for PEI. In Atlantic Canada, we are aging at a rate of 1 out of every 5 residents above the age of 65. We are the smallest province, however, we are nimble, connected, and innovative, so we use our small size to our advantage. Last year, our immigration growth was the highest in the country, and as mentioned, we have an ambitious plan to ensure continued population growth. We are facing low birth rates and out-migration of young people, and we see population growth in our capital region, while rural areas are declining populations. This is concerning. Our working age populations experience similar trends in the national average, with a decrease of 2%. This is concerning, and particularly for our primary industries, fishing, farming, and tourism. To address this, the Population Action Plan seeks to recruit new islanders, retain islanders so they stay over the long term, repatriate islanders who have moved away, and ensure that our rural areas are growing. We are pleased to see the increase in the immigration levels across Canada. We can see that 40% of immigrants went to Western Canada, 37% went to Ontario, 18% to Quebec, and this is 95% of the total. While our Atlantic population is about 6.6% of the national, our immigration rate in Atlantic Canada was 4.6% in 2016. This urban-rural pattern is important to note. When we talk about immigration retention, we need to look at the challenges that smaller areas like PEI face with the pull to the big urban centers. In PEI, we are working hard on recruitment. As mentioned, we are seeing success. The majority of arrivals come through our provincial nominee program, followed by an increase in refugee resettlement. We are proud of our contribution to the Syrian resettlement plan as both an example of population growth and an example of humanitarian support. With the start of the Atlantic pilot, we have increased employer engagement and identified new immigration opportunities. Our post-secondary institutions continue to see in international students at about 1,200 students. Over 60% have expressed an interest to stay on PEI for the long term. Connecting graduates to work and increasing youth retention is key to the work of my department and our Population Action Plan. We are also looking at international and domestic models to boost rural development. We need a settlement plan that focuses on proactive engagement, expanding growth from rural PEI, and a coordinated approach with the federal government. We are also working closely with our Francophone organizations to grow our Francophone community. We believe these efforts, along with community engagement, will lead to improved retention rates. Our last slide notes some of the recommendations. We recommend a national strategy that focuses on rural development. We see this as a direct benefit to Atlantic Canada. We need a coordinated settlement strategy. We can no longer afford to have the federal government and the provincial government both funding settlement and integration initiatives without a coordinated framework. We would be pleased to pilot an integrated model in PEI. Finally, When the former federal government made the decision to close 19 regional immigration offices, PEI lost its face-to-face services. This negatively impacted our province and our clients. Today, when immigrants land, they must report to a landing office in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We continue to be the only province in Canada without an IRCC presence. This reduced service delivery creates an additional barrier to our success. We do appreciate modernization, but in this case, face-to-face services are incredibly important. We support your recommendation number 24 and encourage the committee to look at all impacts in addition to a cost-benefit analysis. It has been a pleasure for us to appear here today, and we are looking forward to any dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gallant. And we'll begin our rounds of questions with Mr. Whalen, and I believe you'll be splitting your time with Ms. Lockhart. Mr. Whalen,
yes,
the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Very interested about the Atlantic Growth Strategy because being an MP from Newfoundland and Labrador, obviously, my province is experiencing the exact same challenges that you've described in PEI in New Brunswick. You know, rising and falling with commodities prices. Certainly, right now we're suffering an additional factor. The 2,000 families, I have some questions around the pilot itself. So for the 2,000 families that are invited to Atlantic Canada under the growth strategy, who, from your perspective, is responsible for designating employers to take advantage of the plan? Is this a shared federal, provincial responsibility? Are you each doing it provincially yourselves? And how have each of your provinces designated employers to take advantage of the pilot project? Start with New Brunswick.
I'm just looking for the lights. Yeah, well, look, I think it's a collective effort. Everybody has a role to play. I think this is what makes this pilot project going to work, and then we're going to have to see some success. I know we in New Brunswick has worked tremendously hard to engage employers. I mean, we've heard it throughout, well, part of the conversation you had previously for the past hour, but what these people are looking for are jobs. And so engaging the employers in the process and getting them to come out on various trade missions around the world to talk to these potential new Canadians, and, you know, before them coming over, they have landed a job. And that's going to, I believe, is going to go a long way in making sure we can retain them into a province like ours or Atlantic Canada. So that is the major difference that's going to, I think, is going to drive a success. But it's a collective effort. The government is working very hard. We, as I said in my slides, that we've added $2.5 million just for this pilot project to increase our resources that we can help trying to go talk to employers and get them more engaged and so forth. And because of that, we have over 200 employers who have stepped up to the plate just in New Brunswick, committing over 1,400 jobs already. So in a short term right now, it's been a success, and we really haven't gone rolling as of yet.
Mr. Gallant?
We in PEI, we work with the employees to try, or the employers to try to keep, you know, get them their settlement programs and keep our immigrants in PEI.
So then, in terms of the number, the 2,000 number, New Brunswick, you've mentioned that you've identified 646 to come. And if another province doesn't pick up its share of the number of, its share of the 2,000, do you feel that New Brunswick would be able to take advantage of that opportunity and take an additional share of, I guess, worker class immigrants into your province along with their families?
As my ADM has just said, there is an agreement within the four provinces that if such a case happens, that we can switch some of those numbers up, that we can go and attract those people. But I wish all my colleagues the greatest success for their numbers, to be able to reach their numbers. But it can happen, yes.
Mr. Gallant, do you think you're going to hit your targets this year?
We will.
Thank you. Alina?
Thank you to the committee for allowing me to be here today. I appreciate it. I have some questions because we have Mr. Ailes here too, along with you, about some of the specifics of the program and what we're doing. Feel free to answer, but how has New Brunswick identified the gaps in our workforce? And I think I ask this question because I think it's important from the communication standpoint. When we do have an unemployment rate, and that's one of the questions we hear a lot. So how are we identifying those gaps?
There's a number of ways, but the main way we're identifying is that we have an employer outreach unit that we're going out and talking to individual businesses, and that's how we're actually identifying the positions that my minister spoke about, the 1,400 jobs. So there's a number of ways to do it through Stokes reports, through economic forecasting that can tell you shortfalls in the medium, short, medium, long term. But we're doing it different. We're going face-to-face in communities, meeting people, asking what are your employment needs, and that's how we're tracking those jobs. So it's a more of an on-the-ground effort than an economic-based model effort.
Okay. And what are the jobs that have been identified? Are there classes of?
I'm glad you asked. We've got them identified in basically every region of the province, and we've got a breakdown by sector, by region. So we've got a number of IT, we've got business service centers, contact centers, transportation, agriculture, seafood processing, agriculture, forestry, food manufacturing, home care, hospitality, food services, administration, finance, and of course the always fun other.
Right. Have you found, just in going through that, are the NOC codes related to this study, the pilot?
They are. When my predecessor from IRCC talked about the medium and skilled, there are different NOC codes for the different parts of the pilot. So yes, and as I went through that list, some are NOC O, some are A, some are B, some are C. So there's a mix.
Have you found that to be a challenge so far?
Not so far, because the pilot has been built to allow us to fill that in, right? So it's given the great flexibility with this pilot.
Okay, great. I'm not sure how much time I have, but I'll keep going. How do you find businesses are engaging the recruitment? You had mentioned doing some travel, but what other ways are they using for recruitment? Tools are they using?
For recruitment tools, well, I mean, it's even in the pilot, they still have to prove that there is a need, because the goal is still Canadians first. So once they prove to us that need, then the other pieces of it take place. So there's a direct recruitment, and then of course right now, as a matter of fact, we have teams that are overseas looking for they have employers with them right now and are kind of not nominating on the spot, but identifying the people on the spot to bring back to New Brunswick. So that is working well. We've found so far that because we've done more direct contact with the employers, their pickup is much higher because they see that service being right there, and we're able to not hold their hand through the process, but assist them in different ways, because immigration is still complex and it is still complicated. We're trying to make it as simplistic as possible, but there are still elements of it that when you move from one side of the world to the other, there are questions that have to be answered, and there are forms that have to be filled out, and we're assisting with that, but there's still a lot of those documentation that need to be done, which just takes time.
Thank you. Ms. Rumpel, and I understand you'll be sharing your time with Mr. Tilson.
Well, I'm just wondering if each of you can take a brief amount of time, very brief amount of time, and explain how the downturn in the energy sector, specifically some of the punitive policies around destabilizing or adding uncertainty to the regulatory process for natural resource projects. So the downturn in the energy sector has affected each of your provinces. My understanding is that what I hear anecdotally is that, and I certainly know that Alberta had a lot of workers from your provinces employed in Alberta in the energy sector, and that has increasingly not become the case. So since we're talking about migration and unemployment, I'd be very curious to hear that from you.
You want to go first or me? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, look, I don't think I want to, maybe you can elaborate more on what punitive policies you're talking about.
I'm happy to, but go ahead.
But I would say that one thing that over the last several years that we've seen in New Brunswick is they put all their eggs in one basket. And I believe that New Brunswick has much more to offer, and when you put all your eggs in one basket, you forget some other sectors that are just as important. You know, the forestry sector, the poultry sector, agricultural sector, transportation sector. I mean, when we talk about...
So just to interrupt, are you saying, by you're saying we put all our eggs in our basket, that the workers who are out of work because of the downturn in the energy sector, that it's somehow their fault that they're unemployed right now?
I did not say that.
Okay, so would you like to clarify?
What I'm saying is that when we...
So are you saying that these people who are out of work right now in their chosen field, that somehow they should go and be employed in the dairy sector? Was that the implication of your comment?
Well, what I'm saying, over a number of years now, the business community in New Brunswick are saying their number one challenge is the lack of a skilled workforce. And that's why we've talked about we have to look at immigration on one of those areas that can help New Brunswick. My ADM just talked about all the various sectors, and they touch many parts of the province where there's a need for workers. So I'd be more than happy to, and we had campaigns throughout the country, including Alberta, to encourage the New Brunswickers to come back home and work in other opportunities as well. And that doesn't mean that the energy sector is not an important sector of the province of New Brunswick.
Just to clarify, because I know that New Brunswick has a lot of natural resources, are you saying that people that are skilled in working in energy fields, such as, say, oil and gas fracking, that they should not come and work in your province in that field?
No, I think you're saying that.
So you are in fact advocating for workers to work in a field such as fracking in your province?
Well, currently you cannot work in fracking in New Brunswick. There's a moratorium that was actually that was approved by the majority of New Brunswickers.
So people that are out of work from New Brunswick that have been working in Alberta, who find them, you're trying to attract them back to New Brunswick, but there's no industry there. So they would have to go work in a different field. Is that correct?
Well, look, I would not go to the statement that you make that there's no industry in New Brunswick. Just like the comment earlier in the previous panel saying there was no jobs in New Brunswick. I think we made it very clear. If you go on NB Jobs here today, you'll have over 3,500 jobs on any given day.
I'm missing the logic here. So you are trying to attract people, immigration, to your province, and there's a lot of people who are out of work who have these skills, yet your province doesn't allow this type of work to happen, and it could conceivably add a lot of jobs and economic growth to your province. So how does a government develop an immigration program to attract workers to a field that they've banned?
Well, I think, again, you make it seem like there's no opportunities for employment opportunities.
So where should people that are out of work in the energy sector from your province go?
Well, when you look at New Brunswick, we do have a strong energy sector as well. We have a nuclear power plant. We have a Coulson Cove in the St. John area.
Oil and gas
there is also a plant in northern New Brunswick in Beldoon. There's our Mactaquac Dam. I think, if anything, New Brunswick, although we're small, we have a very diverse energy sector in the province of New Brunswick that provides many opportunities. Actually, we just said we're going to move forward on the refurbishment of Mactaquac Dam.
As a recommendation for the committee, if we were going to say people who are out of work in the Alberta energy sector, the correct recommendation would be don't go to New Brunswick, correct?
There's a reason why you didn't win a seat in Atlantic Canada.
Well, I would argue that there are a lot of people who are...
Just show a little bit more respect for our province.
No, you show some respect for energy workers and people who have skills in that labor. That is one of the most arrogant comments that I have heard. And I hope that people who are out of work in the skill set hear the arrogance in that comment. To say that somehow this is about seeking power or winning or losing is one of the most ridiculous things that I've heard. And I think that you should respect these workers.
Well, there's a famous person who said Atlantic Canada was defeatist.
Okay.
What, was that you?
That was your former boss.
Okay,
well, what about these workers?
I think we should return to the topic at hand. And Mr. Tilson, you have a minute and 20 seconds.
Wow. Mr. Arsenault, you may have heard I went to the University of New Brunswick and graduated from the University of New Brunswick. It's a great university. But I do recall a number of graduates, they couldn't find jobs. So they left. They moved to, as you call it, Upper Canada. At least back then it was called Upper Canada. So now I have a young lady that works in my office who's a recent graduate from the University of New Brunswick. She couldn't get a job there. So she has moved to Ontario and she has a job in my office, and she's very good, I might tell you. So my question is, and this applies to if there are no jobs.
30 seconds.
If there are no jobs, where are we going to put new immigrants? So my question to you is, how are you working to retain graduates from your post-secondary institutions?
15 seconds, please.
Well, I would say there is jobs, but do I have a job?
There's not jobs, sir. I'm telling
look,
you.
if you have a PhD in math, chances are there's not 1,000 jobs available in New Brunswick. Let's be realistic.
I'm talking about Bachelor of Arts.
Well,
I'm talking about business administration. I'm talking about engineering.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank all the witnesses for taking time to come and present to us and some of the recommendations that you suggested, and that's actually very helpful. I'd like to actually explore a couple of things. One, of course, is the immigration levels numbers. I think I heard that I think for all the provinces, you're on track with respect to the numbers that you're hoping to achieve. And I'm wondering whether or not are those numbers sufficient. So in other words, could those numbers be increased, and would that be useful and helpful in terms of the goals that you're trying to achieve? And I will go to, I guess, to both provinces for a comment.
Would you like to answer that, Mr. Stewart?
Thanks. That's a good question, because levels planning is something that all provinces do from an FPT perspective with IRCC, and it's a complicated process in the sense that you're trying to forecast long term. We in New Brunswick use the Stokes forecast model to do this long-term planning, and we came up the pilot gave us the numbers that we would need to fill our job market needs for the next couple of years, next 3 years. The hope, though, is that this will stimulate the economy and it'll actually grow up, so we'll actually need to have more jobs. We'll need more spots. But we need to evaluate, and that's why the pilot is 3 years. So we can evaluate to see if we push the limit to get to those 2,000, we get there, then we know we need more. And we've negotiated with IRCC that if we need more, there's a willingness to give us more in order to help us meet that job market needs.
Okay. Mr. Stewart?
And I guess I'll echo those comments to a certain degree. I mean, the pilot is for the region. But there is a chance for allocation to move from one province to the other if one province doesn't use their full allocation. And I would say Prince Edward Island is in the same boat, that we have our allocation level currently. If we can retain all those immigrants to PEI, and our economy is growing well now, but we want to see our retention levels before we would seek higher levels.
Well, thank you very much. I think one of the issues that we all face across the country is the aging population is happening everywhere, and most particularly, I think, at the Atlantic provinces, you're impacted, you know, in a significant way and a little bit ahead of the curve in that way. And I constantly think about the immigration levels numbers and whether or not we should actually be increasing those, because we need to fill that gap, and that's the reality. We don't want to wait until you're in such dire situation before you say, oh, gee, we should increase our immigration levels numbers. Interestingly, the ministers, former ministers, expert panel recommended immigration levels numbers to go up to 450,000, but we're still at 300,000, and I actually think that we should increase that number. So I'd love to hear from you. If you need those numbers increased, let us know, because we do need to look at that as well. Now, in terms of, I guess, more sustainable jobs, I think really is one of the key issues, right, in terms of retention, not only for immigrants, for them to stay in your provinces, but also for the young people as well, which, by the way, my former constituency assistant in Vancouver, when I was the MLA there, came from the Atlantic provinces, and you'll be very happy to know she actually moved back to my loss. So with that, and she got a job, and she got a job, and she got a job. So with that, it's not to say all young people will escape, because they do go back, and they want to go back, right? And there are opportunities there. So to that end, what can the federal government do in terms of economic development opportunities to help you create the job opportunities that are there, and to help retain the young people that are there, and also the immigrant population? And I'll go through both provinces for quick answers for those. If you can just give me one or two quick things that you say the government should do X, Y, Z, that would be great.
Okay. One way would be to continue to support the Atlantic Lotteries Opportunity Agency.
Canada. Lotteries, not lotteries. Atlantic Canada.
Atlantic Canada, like ACOA. You know, continue to support that for future initiatives.
Okay.
Continue to support the pilot project on immigration. I mean, this is something that we've been talking for many years. I used to be the minister in this portfolio back in 2009. The aging demographics in New Brunswick is not the first time we've talked about this. We've talked about it for many years, and we wanted the government to help us be a partner with Atlantic Canada, especially New Brunswick, and now we finally got that. I think it will make a difference, and I hope we can come back in 3 years from now at the end of this pilot and see it was successful, and hopefully we can continue and build on that.
Do we need to take action with respect to then also with job opportunities? Because some of the temporary foreign workers program, people come in temporarily and then they go, right? So they actually don't stay. And so, so with respect to that, how could that be addressed in terms of long term, so that those temporary foreign workers, maybe they shouldn't be temporary foreign workers to begin with, maybe they should be immigrants right off the top, and so then therefore they're there to stay and they move their families there to stay?
Yeah, look, that's a very pertinent question. It's a tough one too, though, because I mean the temporary foreign workers, they do fill a very important gap in various economic sectors, especially the tourism sector, the fishery sector, agricultural, that are more seasonal work. Like we have to recognize, and you know, if there's thing I can give credit to the government is that they recognize that, and so that is an important component. However, there's no doubt we want these people to stay even longer, and we've been working hard trying to find ways if they can maybe going from one industry to another in that region that. You know, it's not that easy, but we're working on that. But on the other issues, such as the pilot project here, yeah, we want to focus on long-term growth. And there are sectors that are thriving in New Brunswick, but we're lacking the skilled workforce, and that's why this is so important.
It's been suggested by some in the temporary workforce in that instance to actually allow for people to move from industry to industry and not just be tied to the one employer. So you would support that kind of approach, not just for your region, but really across the country?
Yeah. Although I would support it, it's not my decision to make that.
I get it. I was just trying to get your opinion,
Definitely.
that's all. Yeah.
And us as well. Like, it's not our decision, but we'd certainly support that. You know, if these temporary foreign workers could stay, well, then they could be permanent residents, right? If they could work year-round.
Okay. So then just to build on that, because
10
a lot
seconds.
of... Sorry, how many seconds?
10 seconds.
Oh, a lot of the temporary foreign workers come very, you know, year after year. It's the same people, right? They come. So shouldn't they be permanent residents?
Thank you. Thank you. Monsieur Arsenault, 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the chair as well as all of our guests. Contrary to what my colleagues, Mr. Tilson and Ms. Rempel, says, I come from northern New Brunswick, where there is a flagrant lack of workers. And contrary to what people from more urban regions might think, there are areas where there is zero unemployment, 100% employability. Companies want to grow. They're lacking labor. And it's simplistic to say that, well, that someone has studied that the University of New Brunswick, that there weren't jobs and that today there still aren't jobs. That's way too simplistic. But I don't want to get into the whole socio-political, cultural issue of the Atlantic region that has led to the situation we see today. What I want to talk about today, where I'm from, Madawaska, Mistigouche, is one of the most aging areas in Canada. If 500 people arrive tomorrow, everyone could get a job. We need to simply match jobs and not codes and training. I had the opportunity to be on another committee where we addressed immigration. And the main problem seemed to be attracting immigrants. And then after that, keeping them. Retention seemed the biggest problem. New Brunswick is doing pretty well on immigration. There's still a lot to be done. There's the pilot project. But anyway, retention. This week I spoke to people in a small town, a village of fewer than 1,000 people. They're bringing 14 Belgians to work in a factory because they need people with a certain speciality. The retention problem is that frequently immigrants want to go to places where there are other people who are familiar with their culture and language and ways of doing things. So when they find work elsewhere, if they can find, say, a Belgian community like in Montreal, where they can be with other Belgians and eat mussels and drink beer, then what's the strategy in New Brunswick or in PEI? What's the strategy that is being examined to ensure that we can retain immigrants in rural regions, like the majority of New Brunswick? That's a good question. What we're trying to do is identify the right immigrants for each region. What we've noticed over the years is that we're looking for immigrants everywhere in the world. But then in New Brunswick, it's a very rural province, and it's small compared to the big urban centers of Canada. So when they come to the rural regions of New Brunswick, very often they feel alone because they don't have the family and friends that they might want to have. So it's easier for them to leave for greener pastures. That's why we need to focus on countries, well, fewer countries, and we need to focus more on countries where we've had success. We need to develop communities, like you just said, where they can eat fries and donuts together. That way we'd have better success. But like you said, in your region of Madawaska, in Wesco, well, we've seen that there's a lack of qualified workers in the region, and we need people to fill those jobs in New Brunswick, and it's too bad that these companies are not expanding. Like in other parts of the country, we need to better focus on new Canadians who could stay longer in the province. When it comes to the occupation codes, is that an obstacle to the pilot?
Enough flexibility and leeway, so all the knock codes that are needed we can address. Previously, we had smaller numbers for that. So with the pilot and with the ability to fast track to permanent residency, the knock code issue shouldn't be a problem. And the FQR issue too, we're addressing those. There's still challenges around that, but those challenges are diminishing as we make greater inroads with professional associations to make sure that we bring down those barriers.
Okay. As you're aware, there's a lot of forest industry in the northern part of New Brunswick, and this is a complaint I hear once in a while concerning the classification D, how they called it there.
Yeah, knock code D, right?
Because anything related to transformation of the wood or the forest industry seems to be excluded. Am I correct? Is that my good interpretation?
No, knock Ds tend to be more difficult, although we can use them through the provincial nominee program. But the forestry-specific issues right now, we're working close with the industry. We've identified a number of places in Eastern Europe that have similar forest practices that we do, and we're working right now with those companies to go overseas to find those big operators, skidder operators, and all those other pieces that are taken that are needed. But the knock D is a bit of a different issue, and the knock Ds tend to be around. It's not full-time jobs, and so that's the seasonal nature of it. Sometimes gets confused with the knock code. It has to be full-time jobs, permanent full-time positions, and that's sometimes what some of the forestry industry can't offer, so that we can't use immigration to fill some of those labor market needs.
Okay, so one of the criteria is concerning this pilot project, you need a full-time job. I thought it was like 10 months to full-time.
No, it has to be full-time job.
Full-time job.
Yes.
Because the wood industry, usually it's a full-time job except for the le gel et le dégel.
Oui.
Freezing and defreezing of the forest roads only.
20 seconds.
But that's it. We've had discussions on that. How many hours constitutes a full-time year? If you could get 10 months a year, if you had, I don't know what the numbers are, like 1,000 hours, would that constitute a full-time job? And we're still working on that definition to see if we can change it. But so far, we're still in that discussion mode.
Okay, merci, Michel.
Thank you, merci. Mr. Tilson, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Arsenault, you said in your opening statement, people leaving New Brunswick for other provinces continues to be a primary reason for lower negative population growth rates, especially in rural areas. This is closely tied to unemployment in New Brunswick while boosting the economies of other provinces. So my question to you, and perhaps Mr. Gallant as well, is are you looking to the federal government for financial assistance when it comes to programs to increase both immigration levels to Atlantic Canada, as well as the retention of immigrants when they arrive there, and as well as, and I don't want to get into another debate with you, but as well, I'm going to say it anyway, and you'll challenge me, but as well as the unemployment that exists, particularly in New Brunswick and perhaps Prince Edward Island as well. Mr. Arsenault and then Mr. Gallant.
Well, on your initial question, there's no money tied to the Atlantic immigration pilot. That's why our government put forward $2.5 million in the last budget to assist the work that we're doing on this pilot. But no, what we're looking for from the federal government is to look and understand and work as a partner with Atlantic Canada, more specifically New Brunswick. And, you know, as I said earlier, I mean, this is something that we've talked about for many years. Unfortunately, was not nothing was done about this, and now the government has brought forward, understood the challenge that we have, the aging demographics, and now we can have 2,000 new Canadians per year for the next 3 years, over and above the provincial nominee program of what we have as an allocation in New Brunswick is 1,050 per year.
But are you looking for financial assistance or some financial plan?
No, no.
Mr. Gallant? Minister Gallant, I'm sorry. I call you the right titles.
Rather than financial assistance, we'd be looking at more coordinated effort between the federal and provincial governments. Which is part of our recommendations.
Returning to the issue of unemployment, if you increase the immigration levels or asylum claimant levels, will that displace jobs? Will that displace people, people looking for jobs in Prince Edward Island or New Brunswick?
Look, I don't believe it will. We're not forgetting New Brunswickers. I mean, if anything, we're investing more today than we ever done in terms of investing in New Brunswickers. We understand that we need to provide them the opportunities. We have pilot projects all across our province with social assistance client, identifying those that we feel that they have the opportunity, the ability, if given the opportunity, they can get the proper training in order to enter the workforce. So we do have those kinds of programs. We've initiated last year free tuition for family incomes of $60,000 and less for public universities and colleges. That gives the opportunity for people who weren't thinking of even pursuing a post-secondary education and entering into a career. That's a huge program, first in the country as well, and we furthered those programs this year. So we're not forgetting New Brunswickers. We feel that there's in some instances they need more training, and as a government, we're trying to offer that to them.
Can you tell us the unemployment rate of in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island?
Give or take 9%.
Mr. Gallant, Minister Gallant.
I was close to the same.
10.1.
10.1.
Yeah.
Could I just answer?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. Gallant, you're right. I did ask you.
Could I just respond to that? Like, our economy is growing, so to answer to your displacement effect, like, the economy is growing and our unemployment rate has dropped by 1%, and we've created about 1,500 jobs. So
still higher than the rest of Canada, both provinces.
Because that's trendy, and that's our seasonality curve.
Well, it's not trendy, it's a fact. I mean,
well, it's a fact, but it's due to our...
And we have to talk about your employment if we're going to talk about encouraging immigrants and asylum seekers to come to your provinces. We have to talk about your economy. And so far, I'll be quite frank, you're not convincing me that your economy is that hot. Mr. Arsenault, you like to fight me. Can you comment on that?
I talked a lot. I figured.
Is it okay if I add a few comments there?
10 seconds, please.
if you go back and look at the economic results for the province of Prince Edward Island over the last 2 years, the growth rates for GDP and manufacturing exports have generally been in the top 1, 2, or 3 positions in Canada. So our economy is growing well right now, and we need workforce to sustain that growth.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. Mr. Casey, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It'll come as no surprise, being a Prince Edward Island Member of Parliament, that I'm going to focus my questions on the Prince Edward Islanders here, with the greatest of respect, Minister Arsenault. I want to start with the very last bullet in your very last slide, where you talk about and also in your opening remarks, Mr. Gallant, where you talked about the decision of the Conservative government to make Prince Edward Island the only province in Canada that does not have face-to-face service for immigrants. And we see in the briefing note from the Library of Parliament the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council talks about the lengthy processing times. So I want to ask this question a couple of ways. First of all, what's in your slide is a recommendation from a parliamentary committee that talks about regional immigration offices. I'm not sure that would solve the problem that only in Prince Edward Island can an immigrant not get face-to-face service from Citizenship and Immigration Canada. Can you talk about the impact that decision has had over the last 4 or 5 years since face-to-face service in our province has been terminated?
You know, as we mentioned, we may not have mentioned the exact date, but the Immigration Office in PEI closed in 2012. And, you know, with no office there, it makes it very difficult for the immigrants to get services. And, you know, they're less likely to stay if they can't get the services when they need them. They have to leave the province.
Just this week, Premier McLaughlin issued the population strategy for Prince Edward Island, and I expect, Minister, you probably saw the local newspaper today where there was a critique of that population strategy. And part of their critique is that this is something that we heard about during the provincial election. This was something that we heard about in the throne speech. And there's not a lot new in it. Now, I expect that you probably were not interviewed in advance of that article being published, so this is your chance to tell your side of it. What can you tell us about the population strategy that was released this week in terms of the progress that has been made along the population strategy in recent years?
Okay, thank you. Well, this plan, the Population Action Plan, was initiated by our Premier, and it had 3 high points: recruit new Islanders, retain our youth and immigrants to PEI, and repatriate thousands of Islanders residing elsewhere. You know, work with partners, employers, municipalities, post-secondary institutions to help us create more employees and immigrants, and rural areas will be given special focus on that in the report. And you know, the biggest thing, I mean, most of our rural areas are losing their population to the urban area. So that's a big part of the action plan.
Now, Minister, I'm happy to have you answer this question, but if you want to delegate it to Ms. McPherson, I know we've met on this subject before, and her technical grounding on the subject is extensive. I'll leave it up to you. I wonder if you could give a bit of an explanation for the process under the Atlantic Growth Strategy, the immigration pilot within the Atlantic Growth Strategy, in terms of, there's a bunch of terms that you use, designations issued, endorsement applications received, endorsements issued. Can you walk us through the steps and tell us just exactly where we stand in Prince Edward Island in terms of getting to that 120 family target?
Mr. Stewart, if you would.
So since the pilot was started, I guess, in March in earnest, we held sessions across Prince Edward Island to inform employers of the requirements for them to participate in the pilot, and that's where we talk of designating an employer to be an eligible employer under the pilot. Through those sessions, the employers learned that they were going to be required to provide enhanced settlement services if they wish to. If they wish to participate in the pilot. So we have designated 62 employers, and we have 21 applications from immigrants to immigrate under the pilot, and we've endorsed 14 of those immigrants so far to come through the pilot.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists for coming to Ottawa from Atlantic Canada to provide insights on the challenges that you face. And with that, we'll suspend for a couple of minutes to allow the next panel to assemble. And the meeting will resume, and pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on October 4th, 2016 and April 3rd, 2017, the committee will resume its study on immigration consultants. And from the department, we have before us Mr. Michael McDonald, Director General, Immigration Program Guidance, Mr. David Kashabak, Director, Immigration Branch, and Mr. Chris Myers, Director General, Finance. Welcome, gentlemen. There will be no opening statements. We'll move immediately to questions. Ms. Zaid, and I believe you're splitting your time with Ms. Jarowitz.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Zaid.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the officials for coming out. I know it has been delayed a few times, so as we conclude our study on the immigration consultants, we have heard a lot of testimonies and a lot of recommendations which has been coming. So my first question is that should we replace, should the Government of Canada abandon the current self-regulation model for immigration consultants and replace it with an independent government regulator, empowered, mandated, and resourced to investigate complaints against immigration consultants and refer complaints to law enforcement forces when appropriate? What is your view on this?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair, and for the opportunity to appear before you today. Were the government to go into a different direction, that is to regulate this directly rather than the current arm's length relationship that we have now, I think the first step from our perspective is there's definitely a bit of a policy tension that has to be explored about whether and how to address the tension between the department's primary function, which is assessing and making decisions on clients' applications, and that of regulating and setting the conditions for consultants whose function would be to assist applicants to put that best case forward. So once that is set out, I think then we're in a world where to assess the steps to get to that outcome. Definitely from our perspective, consultations with provinces and territories, but also a lot of work to design what would be core elements of the program. And maybe on that, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. Chair, part of the response to this is really trying to look at the options around what such an organization or entity would be doing. Like exactly what is it that you would want to work with consultants and what type of activities? The part of the answer to that question will clearly rub up against other departments' current mandates. So there will be some machinery of issue changes, I would think, that would have to be contemplated and advice given on that. You'd also have to look at any scope in terms of what is the nexus with the territories and the provinces. You'd have to look at any scope around what is it that such an organization would have in terms of powers. For example, powers to enter premises, powers to undertake certain types of investigations, powers to subpoena documents, powers to compel individuals. So that is, operationalizing. There's some key questions that would have to be looked at around how and what would the government of the day want this organization to be doing on the ground and working with both consultants. And then, of course, there's the age-old problem, which we've talked about, which is any organizational construct, how is it that you get at the ghost consultants? How is it that you get at those that are many times unreachable, be they overseas or what have you?
So do you think that the ICCRC model should be finished completely?
I think at this stage, it's fair to say that the department is 100% committed, and we have shown that, to working with the current construct of the ICCRC. The question for us, I just met with them 2 weeks ago, for example, and we talked in a very open and frank way about how can we make the ICCRC even better, or what more could it do, and how could the department help in that regard? Is there more types of sharing that we can do around trends and patterns? Is there more conversations that we could have with the Board of Governors, still respecting the legislative framework that establishes the ICCRC? We feel, and so do I think the ICCRC, that there is a lot of space that can be done there to help improvements, as any organization needs to be improved.
Proceeding further, like the one more recommendation is that the regulatory body should establish qualifications for registration as an immigration consultant and develop a tiered system as to the categories of services individual consultants are permitted to provide. Most consultants would be able to provide basic information and perform transactional work such as completing and submitting applications, while a few qualified consultants should be permitted to appear before the IRB. What's your input on this recommendation?
Again, I think that's something that needs to be looked at in terms of what is the purpose of having a tiered type of a model. I'm not sure, David, if you have anything more, but I think it's worth assessing and seeing what is the value of doing a tiered model and what more does it give you than perhaps what doesn't exist today. And at the end of the day, what does it give clients? What does it give those prospective and what does it give those current clients?
Ms. Jurwitz, 2 minutes, 40 seconds.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, and thanks again for coming back. We heard testimony that under the current Section 91, settlement agencies and NGOs are not able to provide immigration support as they fear that they're barred from doing so under this section. They're particularly worried about the word consideration. Was this the intention of the current Section 91? Like this is, yeah.
Section 91 was designed to help get at the problem, as the committee I'm sure is aware, of people who are operating in the ghost consultant fashion. So getting at that was the objective of the day, and it was around making a framework that was the best way to get at that. I want to point out that there's also Section 91 sub 4, which allows the IRCC to enter into agreements with organizations so that they don't run afoul with Section 91.1. We do that in the overseas refugee selection process with the IOM and the UNHCR, for example. So we have a framework, but then we also have some explicit abilities to allow those that really help the immigration system in a certain way. And we did it on Syria, for example, with the
30 seconds.
UNHCR. But again, we've tried to give as clear guidance as possible on our website around the do's and don'ts around Section 91. So we've tried to explain to NGOs and service provider organizations what it means to assist a client, to translate something for a client, help the client navigate the internet, our webs, our forums. So I think the more education and the more clarity is probably and we're finding the best way to work with the organization.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Tilson, and you're splitting your time with Mr. Soria?
I am. Mr. Chairman,
hard to hear.
The internal governance of the ICCRC, in listening to the evidence that we've had so far at this committee, it's a disaster. It's really not working well. In fact, I'm normally a supporter of self-governance, and this is a form of self-governance, and I don't know whether Ms. Kwan is winning me over, maybe she is, but I'm concerned that this impacts their ability to be an effective regulator. So how informed is the department on the daily running of the affairs of the ICCRC? Like, do you know what they're doing?
Thank you, Chair. The question of how informed comes down to the relationship that we've not only struck, but the relationship, as I mentioned earlier, that we're pushing the boundaries on how much we can work with, share with, and try and help the ICCRC and have new ways of looking at things. We have regular exchanges with the ICCRC management structure. I met with some of the board members. I met with some of the senior management and executives within the organization 2 weeks ago. We had a very frank and open conversation around issues, but then we talked about ways to move forward and places and where we could help, ICCRC could help the organization. The exchange is robust, and we are on a very collaborative communication. We still respect the boundaries of how they need to operate, though.
Well, I guess the question is, what do we do now? Do we get rid of them? Does the department take it over? I mean, I'm just maybe I'm alone, but my observation listening to the testimony is that it's not working. In fact, maybe you could elaborate. What concerns does the department have with respect to the ICCRC and their tenure, excuse me, as a regulator over the last 6 years? Because you must have thoughts on that as to whether they should continue, whether it can be fixed, and whether we should have something else.
Chair, that really comes down to, I think, three common areas where we've again fostered the relationship and tried to move it forward. The first area is around the complaints process. We feel, and we have been having open conversations with the ICCRC around the length of time it takes to resolve complaints, respecting the fact that things don't always have a perfect start date and an end date. That's understandable. But there's more that can be done, and it needs to be done faster, and that's the message we've delivered. I also think the second area is around education, and I think they can do a better job, and we're trying to help them do a better job in ensuring that the consultants that are registered do have the best basis and understanding of the systems, including our forms and everything that's out there. The third, which is the conversations that we entered into just not long ago, is really around the stability of the organization. And again, if there's areas where they need help ensuring the stability of the organization, the board, or the organization itself, we are open to dialogue, and we are open to actively helping and sharing lessons learned and so on.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Soroya.
Mr. Soroya, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for you coming up and the stuff. Mr. McConnell, have you seen this CBC article?
No, I have not.
CBC investigation. We need the immigrants, vice versa. We need the immigrants, and we need them, and we want them to come. For the past 6 years, or even I can go back to 31 years, the system hasn't worked. We all know this. According to the CBS investigation, the council that oversees thousands of immigration consultants in Canada is in the midst of what many described as a crisis beset by resignation, infighting, and harsh criticism from lawmakers and lawyers. This is how Jennifer Burke replied back to CBC. The department is following this issue carefully. We remain confident that the IRCC will resolve any internal issues. The department is in regular contact with the IRCC, and there are reporting requirements that IRCC must follow. The department will continue to monitor and will provide support as necessary. What is the department doing? What department is going to bring them back in line? I also understand 5 of the 15 directors quit in the last 6 months. It's like you're trying to run a company with 33% management quit. How would you fix it with respect?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll go back to my previous response around what we have been doing and what we've committed to do going into the future with the ICCRC and being very open about that. And again, it comes down to them creating an environment of stability on the board and within the organization itself. And I think the recent appointment of the new CEO is a very good sign towards the board of the directors. Is a very good sign of that, and he should bring a certain level of stability as well as knowledge, having been working for many years in the profit as well as not-for-profit areas. And again, comes down to the quality of their services out to their membership. And that's my comments around the educational aspect, and we have offered to assist them with those types of packages. We have also offered, in addition, to represent ourselves more at their events. I've appeared at several of their events, their training, national training forums. And again, back to the complaints process, I think public confidence is enhanced if you have a robust, active, and quick complaints process for the
20 seconds, please.
If I can follow up, the public trust is the main thing. The public trust isn't there so far. I know you're doing the level best, but it hasn't worked for the last number of years. but Mr. Tilson said, should you, the government, the body, take over and redo the whole thing? Let this IRCC go.
Quick yes or no, yes or no answer is all we have time for.
Thank you.
I'm not in a position to answer yes or no, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for coming back. Let me start the question with this. How much is the government providing to ICCRC for them to do their work? What's their annual budget in all the variations of different contracts that you sign with them to carry out their work? How much is it?
So the department, the government is not currently providing any funding to the ICCRC. When it was initially created in March of 2011, there was a contribution agreement that was signed between the department and the organization to help fund startup expenditures that the organization was incurring. That was in the amount of $1 million, and that was paid over 3 fiscal years. The contribution was a repayable contribution. So after a period of time, ICCRC was to and is repaying the government the amount of that assistance.
So you're saying that aside from your department, so your department provides $0 to ICCRC to carry out their work, and that your department has not entered into any contracts with them?
In March 2011, there was a contribution agreement that was signed to help fund the startup of the organization. That was $1 million payable over 3 fiscal years. That was paid. And since that time, the organization has been repaying the amount of that contribution. So by the time the final payment is received, that amount will have been fully recovered, the $1 million.
Are there any other departments from government that's contracted ICCRC to carry out their work?
I don't have a definitive question, but I think you would need to ask them. But we are not aware of any other government department that has contracted with the ICCRC for their services. But I leave it for ICCRC to be able to answer that.
Maybe we can get that information from the analyst or the library or somebody, because that seems to contradict some other information that was presented to the committee at different times. Okay, then let me go to this. The reality is, through this committee, we've heard from witness about the disastrous situation with ICCRC on so many levels that I won't rehash all the issues that were brought to our attention. I think fair enough to say that committee members, walked away thinking that the days of self-regulation by that industry is done, and that we need to go to a different model, perhaps a governance model to be regulated by the government. One of the issues that people have raised and brought to our attention is that complainants are even afraid to go forward because they fear that they would be penalized. And one suggestion would be to find a mechanism to ensure that those complainants are protected in that process. Is that something that the department can look into and see how we can actually materialize that option to protect the complainants if they were to come forward with a complaint?
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 parts to this. One is we agree with the idea of if something is not working, you work to make it better. If that is looking at a wholesale policy advice to the government of the day around different models, and I think that's a key word, around different models, we are committed and always have been committed to having those types of analyses and exercises.
I'm just going to interject for 1 minute here. This model, ICCRC, is the second iteration, by the way. Mm-hmm. The other self-regulatory model that was also another colossal disaster, and we're back at it again. So we've been trying for some time now. Maybe the days of, my view is that the days of self-regulation has come and gone, and that the industry must earn their way back to getting that privilege, actually, to self-regulate, and that we've now moved into a different direction, I think, and I certainly will be calling for a recommendation for the committee to move forward to the government and that there be a government-regulated model with respect to this industry. So let me go to the specific questions, because I'm running out of time, I think, on the complainants and how best to protect them.
in keeping with the spirit of my first response, Mr. Chair, any analysis that would be undertaken, and we are willing to do that.
Sorry. I'm just going to get you to move to the complainant question. So I don't want to talk about the spirit of first response because we already had that several rounds. So let's just get to the how to best to protect the complainants.
I think the best way, or we feel the best way to protect complainants in the current structure is through pushing out as much education as possible and awareness. We talked in our last appearance about the anti-fraud.
Okay.
We talked about working with the ICCRC. We talked about also how our department undertakes level 1 type investigations around complaints. And we talked about ways of finding unique ways of reaching applicants and clients through social media and through other venues.
Thank you. Yes, education certainly is one component. Is there an opportunity where the government can, for example, where a complainant comes forward and there's been misrepresentation presented in their application by the representative, and sometimes unbeknownst to the applicant, can there be a provision to say that those complainants who come forward with these cases would be protected and that they be given the opportunity to make the corrections in their applications and still have the applications processed? Just a simple yes or no. Is that a possibility that you can look at as an option?
That is a possibility.
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, then I'm going to move on to the next issue that's been brought to our committee's attention. That is a graduated licensing process. So that is to say that not all consultants are equal and that you have to go through various training at different levels to be able to do different kinds of work. Is that a option that can be adopted? And not under the current model, under any model, can that be adopted as a practice for a graduated licensing process?
Graduated licensing could be, and in fact exists today in terms of student advisors at universities.
Correct. So this is entirely feasible. So thank you. Now,
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Okay, protection for nonprofits, because there's a big issue around nonprofits who's doing this work. Can we look at increasing the funding for nonprofits to do this work, and then as well ensuring that they could be protected in that process, because a lot of times they are not actually paid, such as consultants or lawyers are? Quick yes or no.
I think an analysis can certainly include that.
Thank you. Mr. Tavares, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to kind of follow up with Ms. Kwan on her question that she was asking. We've talked about graduated licensing process in this committee various times, and then you just in your response to her question, you talked about currently students have university students have an advisory system. Can you just elaborate on that? What you meant in response to her question?
Sure. In December 2014, the ICCRC adopted a bylaw that granted limited licensure to international student advisors. So it was a conversation that took place within the independent body. We, of course, participated in order to find a way for these student advisors to be able to offer some degree of assistance to students, but it's not full membership in their organization.
That was started in 2014?
December 2nd, 2014.
Do you have any information on maybe some of the success that came out of it or some of the responses from students?
I don't have from the student perspective. I would say in the spirit of the conversation we're having today, Mr. Chair, I think this was an example of a situation where it was not clear what kind of services these student advisors were providing, whether or not they were falling within or without of the legislative and regulatory framework. So this was it was a positive step at the time to address a need. Whether our understanding is that it has worked acceptably for students. It gives them a service that they would otherwise there'd be a gray zone around.
Okay. If there was a complaint that occurred, what group at the department is responsible for reviewing the ICCRC's report and for ensuring that the public is protected?
Any complaints that come into the department go into the operations area, and we look at that actually in several parts of our department. including those in our integrity and risk area that actually do what's called the level 1 investigations, and are also the group that decides if a complaint is warranted to go up to a level 2, and that's when we make a decision and pass it over to the Canada Border Services Agency.
Okay. Just going to move on to another question here. We have heard from lowercase illegality when it comes to consultants is often not dealt with by the CBSA. And we know that ICCRC is not legally mandated to go after non-registered consultants. What measures do you suggest to tackle this gray area? And are you in favor of establishing a blacklist for people who have constantly been involved in fraud?
Sorry, can you just read the last sentence? I missed what you're...
If you're in favor of having a blacklist for those that...
Currently, the department, IRCC, we have worked with, for example, overseas missions, and we've worked with overseas governments. We just had conversations in the Latin American region, trying to push out an understanding of any pockets of activities by ghost consultants that we have picked up or others have picked up, or clients, quite frankly, have informed us about. We found that engaging the foreign governments is actually one of the better ways to try and get them to understand and try and help us in addressing the issue of ghost consultants. And as you no doubt have heard and we talked about last time, it's that extraterritorial behavior that is the hardest thing for us to get at, and would be the hardest for any organization to get at. The question of blacklists, I think it goes back to, again, our very first question, Chair, where we talked about a model and what is it you want the model to do. Is an AMPS and ban regime, is some type of public display of anyone who's been subject to an AMPS and ban like we do in other programs across the government. Would that be appropriate? Would be part of, I think, an analysis of what is some of the better ways. The key, as always, which your question really gets to, is how do you make prospective clients aware, and how do you make current clients aware? And the best, as we talked about, was through the social media and through the public notifications, some of which we already do right now, and some of which we heighten during Fraud Awareness Week.
Okay. Mr. Chair, how much time? 2 minutes? Okay. What measures, we talked about education, but what measures would you suggest in addition to the current ones to educate all of the potential applicants and refugee claimants about their rights, about the regulations and requirements for consultants?
What additional measures could be taken? I think there's a host of additional measures, and it's not one single measure that will make the best impact. It's going to be a very broad and holistic approach, and that's why we keep talking about, can the anti-fraud awareness campaigns go on be better? Yes, they can, and we're trying to find ways, and we are finding ways to make those better. Our program changes. Every time we change a program, every time we change a kit, a guide, a form, we have to do, and we have to get better at, but we are getting better at, is educating people about what that means, including the very consultants that fill out those forms. Again, improving the complaints and discipline process sends a pretty strong message, and I think it does enhance public trust when swift action is taken on individuals. We also are trying to find better ways to encourage clients. Those people that we do find out have been negatively impacted, and this is in the domestic as well as the overseas context. We are trying to find better ways of reaching out to them and making sure that they know that they do have avenues of redress that they can take, and they will not be punished, because that is a concern of a lot of the clients is that. Also, just sharing the gaps and the awareness of trends. There's certain pockets of the world where we see different behaviors with the problems of ghost consultants. And even, quite frankly, even how applicants are understanding our forms and our kits and our guides. So we try and respond to those trends.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Ms. Rumpel, 5 minutes, please.
You're seeing a rare moment of unanimity in this committee. I actually echo the sentiments that most of my colleagues have made. The issues that were sort of broadly touched upon in the testimony that we heard were significant issues within the IRCC governance and the board, issues within regulated consultants themselves, the ability to, as Mr. Tabar was saying, actually go after ghost consultants. And also, a lot of questions on why consultants are in high demand right now, linking back to some of the recommendations that came up with the client modernization. The fact that there is a lack of transparency or perceived lack of transparency and ease in the application process basically creates an industry. So, I've been giving some thought around this because to me, we're essentially saying, okay, well, how do we regulate a body like the Canadian Dental Association or another regulatory body? But the reality is that this is a group of people who provide services to navigate a governmental process. So it's a little bit different than other professional services organizations. And in that, where I'd like to echo, some of the comments that my colleagues have made, I think that we're kind of in agreement here that the current system is severely broken. So the question becomes for me, and I'd like to get your feedback on this, to me there's a significant lack of direct accountability for or reporting mechanisms. Like they're just not clear, right? I mean, as parliamentarians, it's very difficult for us to understand why and how certain appeals mechanisms, review mechanisms aren't happening. So I think we're kind of at the spot where we believe that the government and the department has to take a more direct role, and that the ICCRC in its current format is not particularly functional and perhaps can never be particularly functional. So I think we're sort of at the point where it's either the government, we just completely dismantle this organization, that's our recommendation, because of its, just abysmal testimony that we've heard in the last several meetings, or we significantly tighten and clarify a legislation that provides the department with more accountability and responsibility in oversight of some of these gaps. So I guess what we're asking you is what's easier, but more importantly, what's more effective? Because we've done now, I was talking to some of my Liberal colleagues, I think this is the third or the fourth study that's happened on this. And you have to realize that as members of Parliament, we're the front line, like our offices are the front lines on these issues. So I don't want to be sitting here in 2 years again looking at this. So as a department, you have your 1 minute now to say, what is more effective? Not what's easier for departmental officials, but what's better for the people that are being defrauded and are being affected by this? Is it to have direct accountability with oversight within the department, where the department can look at things like, perhaps more transparency or more mechanisms to make the application process easier? Or is it a significantly tightened up regulatory framework with a heightened departmental oversight over some sort of existing model? What's more effective? And if you want to speak to cost as well. But I think that's kind of where this committee is at in terms of recommendation right now. It cannot continue unabated.
I think at this point in time, Chair, there is a model that exists enshrined in legislation and regulation. We do feel that there is more movement and progress that can be made in the current model. That's what exists today.
What does that mean?
That is where we're operating. The ICCRC exists. It's under the not-for-profit. Any changes, as Mr. Cashback talked about.
So what are those specific improvement points?
The specific improvements of points could be, for example, and this is where I had conversations with them the other 2 weeks ago, is around the direct accountability. It is around, is there options for more robust public accounting from the organization out to the public, out to their members? We feel that there is a lot more space that can be done in terms of helping them improve their complaints and discipline process.
And I'm not trying to be combative here. My concern is that what we've established here, even with that, is they're acting as a dysfunctional middleman, right? So is the department going, if we do go down that route, is the department going to spend a lot of time and resources babysitting a dysfunctional group that's not actually going to
10
deliver?
seconds.
Do you really think that there's any way, and if so, how, that the ICCRC can be saved? Because I think a lot of us around this table have a feeling that that's a no.
A brief response, please.
again, Mr. Chair, in the current legislative framework, we are 100% committed to making the organization the best it can be, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, 5 minutes, please.
Defer to Ms. Sherwitz.
Ms. Sherwitz, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And just maybe continuing on that, on Ms. Rempel's questioning, should there be a recommendation from us to replace ICCRC with a government-regulated body, what would be the minimum timing needed for transition, and what would be the logistical and practical considerations to consider in making the recommendation?
You got it?
I think, excuse me. In a way, it's a bit premature for us to give you or give the committee a sense of the timing. To give a sense of, I think first, and it harkens back to Mr. McDonald, some of his answers, it would depend on the scope of what it is you and the government is deciding this organization would do, in terms of whether it's setting standards for entry, setting specific rules, giving a new body specific enforcement and or investigative bodies, what kind of machinery changes those would require. In any event, changes in this area, there would be likely legislative changes. There would likely and very likely be regulatory changes. So the time frame, it's sort of hard to say how long those steps would take to complete.
So, Mr. Cashback, I think what we're basically saying, if we decide that we're going to recommend that ICCRC is replaced with a government-regulated body, what we're trying to do is say, once you make that recommendation, you start moving forward, we're trying also to be very thoughtful about what other recommendations we might need to make, like in terms of timing, in terms of making sure that what needs to continue to exist while we're actually considering what those regulations are, considering what that new framework would be, trying to make sure that we put something proper in place. I think you get a very strong feeling that we don't feel that what has been proposed has worked. There's been a number of different iterations on this for a number of years. So what we're trying to do is just be as thorough as possible in our own recommendations. And while we're not expecting you to say, here's all the regulations that need to change, we'd love a little bit of feedback in terms of typically we need a one-year period to be able to come up with a new framework or some sort of transition, or here's some other elements you might need to think about in your recommendations in terms of replacing what currently exists with a government-regulated body. So that's kind of what we're looking for at this point. So if anybody can respond to that, I'd be grateful.
Chair, I think in partly responding to that is to look at a model that exists already, and that is in Australia. So for example, I think that's a great starting point to look at how they have approached it, where the body seems to have more ability to influence how that sector behaves and what the regulators do. For example, strict code of conduct. One could look at having stricter parameters around what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. Registration and education requirements would have to be a part of that as well.
So can I just stop you for 1 minute, Mr. McDonald? Just because in my mind, if say we went out with a recommendation that says we'd like to replace ICCRC with a government-regulated body, what we don't want to do is cause confusion in the industry. So that's what we're trying to do, say what else do we need to do? Should we also say what exists right now will exist for the next 2 years until we contemplate what might be a good body? That's kind of what I'm looking for in terms of maybe some elements we need to consider in making that recommendation.
Go ahead.
The model, as it currently stands, I mean, I think there is an authority we introduced in 2011. It is the minister's authority to designate the institution. It's a regulatory authority. So in any transitional, were the government to change its path, that at the very least there would need to be a decision to change that regulatory framework, and were the case, in that case, a decision to de-designate the current regulated body. So from a transitional perspective, we've got an instrument that would stay, in
place
effect
until we actually make the change. Okay. I don't have any other questions unless my colleagues do. Anybody else?
Nope.
No? Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the department officials for coming before the committee once again. And with that, we will suspend for a minute and we'll ask the room to clear so we can go in camera. Thank you.
you.